organization has so many registrar minutes to invest. And the registrar minutes it has to invest determines the number of sign-ups which an organization has. Interviews with the registrar, 284. Is somebody kidding? For one registrar? No. Figure it out for yourself. There's 284 interviews during the week. Then how many registrar minutes could there have been spent with each prospect? And you find out that it couldn't have been at all. They must have dusted off a chair in the waiting room or something. Do you get how you figure out the coins? This is the internal economy of an organization, and these are the real factors of economy. Now, it's the HAS that makes them available to be spent. He's in charge of the personnel. He's in charge of the lines. And he's in charge of the spaces. So he also must be in charge of the potential coins that the organization has to spend. Not dollars, they're worthless. He's in charge of how many auditing hours the HGC can furnish, how many instructor minutes can be furnished, how many typist minutes, which contributes directly to typist letters. You don't sit around all the time wondering about this letter stat. Get real. It's typist minutes. How long does it take a typist to type a letter? And you will immediately see exactly that you have a ceiling. Now, the letter registrar that is dictating the letters is that many registrar minutes, but that required a certain number of folder actions, and you can immediately determine how many letters out the organization can achieve. Now, this is economy. I'm not talking about this corny Hungarian stunt where they go around and tell Wilson, well, all you got to do is borrow 100 billion from the next international bank. That's not economy, that's crap. We're talking about real things. We're talking about real things. We're talking about typist minutes. You sit down. It's an elementary exercise in arithmetic. What's your letters out? Well, if you're going to have to do letters out, and if somebody wants the letters out stat up, there's going to have to be another typist. And then to keep her busy, well, they probably have to be 2 more typists to keep a letter registrar busy. So you're going to have to hire an entirely new team of 2 typists and a letter registrar, and then that's going to keep central files in a worse turmoil, and so on. So we're probably going to have to put somebody on central files as a liaison. You want more letters out, I have to have 4 people. Central files clerk, additional central files clerk, additional letter registrar, and 2 additional typists to keep up with this 1 letter registrar. Now you got production. Now you got letters out. Now, to the degree that the HAS sees that their hats get put on, the quality of that production will get very good. They can bang out any old kind of letter. We've received one of the funniest letters here. Once in a while, a staff member or somebody, an aide or something's name will appear, of course, on some old organizational CF or address file, and they will get a letter from this organization, say, Kokomo or someplace, and they quite often are quite good. Don't worry about that. So we received one day that was hilarious. The letter said, "Dear blank, you are invited," signed. Marvelous letter. Wow. Their quality could be improved. But with that short a letter, I imagine their volume was pretty good. So anyway, the HAS can go at a slipshod basis and just hope that it all happens in some fashion and sit there with a total cacophony and mess going around in his vicinity and the lines just all going so on. Listen, if it's interbulated in an HCO, then the HCO does not have control of the lines of the organization, obviously. So where should be the first point of calm in an organization? The calmest, most orderly place in the organization should be HCO. If HCO is roof, roof, and wow, wow, and then the lines are going, and there's mobs of people pressing in, and so on, and et cetera, I wouldn't give you much for the rest of the lines in the organization. They couldn't possibly be under control. Now, here's one for you. Here's a product org officer datum. The product officer and the org officer separate right at the point of line. When the org officer zone is entered, it's at the point of line. The product officer finds himself handling line is already into the province of the org officer. Because the org officer, an essential part of organization, is the lines. The simple thing, like the dispatch that gets from here to there, and so on. Now, a product officer of any sort whatsoever is running without lines. He doesn't have any lines. He didn't have any lines at all. He's going around as basic observational actions, mainly. But we get into a thing where a line, I'll differentiate this exactly, it's where a line has to be formed in the organization, where a line has to be formed at that point, and at that exact point, an organizational line has to be handled or put in. You have now entered the province of the org officer. You could, out of self-defense, as a product officer, get somebody to do something that had to be done at that moment to go through. But the second that you have to transfer this person or do something like that and so on, you're into the province of the org officer. You often find yourself in that province in production. Now, the basic lines of the organization are in the control of the HAS, and those lines all have to be neat and so on. So, it is nothing for a product officer to find something out with the lines. This is the main thing he finds out. So therefore, an org officer ought to do dummy runs. And there's two types of dummy runs. They're just plain dummy runs. You just go through the organization's public lines one way or the other. Try to get hired or something like this. Or try to take advantage of this new free offer. And go into the proper point and so forth and just try to get it. You sometimes find yourself in practically a fist fight. Well, what you find out is passed to the HAS. That's passed to the HAS as a direct signal that his lines have to be established at this point. The other type of dummy run is a bull bait. And you take a whole bunch of questions. Which the public would be prone to ask. And you'd be surprised how funny some of the questions are. You just dream up these questions. Well, I have a check here on the Farmers Bank of Des Moines, and it is for $2,000, and I owe you $260. So if you could give me the change, why, then I would be happy to buy, and so forth, and see what your cashier does. See what he says. See if he handles it at all. You find out the bulk of the cashiers just sort of say, get out. Get out. That's not the proper public response. And therefore, your bull bait dummy runs pay off, because the bull bait dummy run tests the personnel. Just a plain dummy run just tests the line. Does the line exist? Even if you say things to the personnel, does the line exist? But it takes a bull bait dummy run to test the personnel. So the organizing officer, in his spare time, could very easily throw in plain dummy runs and bull bait dummy runs and so forth, and he'll furnish a lot of material for the HAS. So if the HAS were on the ball, he'd run his own dummy runs, wouldn't he? INR function to do a dummy run. Form 1, dummy runs, that sort of thing. So, is there an establishment there? Is all the organization or the organizing officers trying to find out, is there an establishment there? Now, the HAS, of course, is being fixed firmly with the responsibility for putting the establishment there. And you're going to get all kinds of vagaries, and he's going to get in all kinds of trouble, he's going to get in all kinds of arguments, and he's also going to get all kinds of wins. Because one of the arguments he's going to get immediately is, we can't afford it. As a matter of fact, in Washington at one time, there was only one thing that was ever came out of any finance lines and so forth: we don't have any money. And they had found this as the pattern answer to anything that was brought up by anybody, and they found this always worked. And this was how, not to give any service, I forget who was handling money there at that time, but it was just that. And I kept hearing this coming back on the lines: we don't have any money. It was an errant lie. I think at that particular time for Washington, we had a fabulous reserve, and we were running along great. The staff was well paid and everything of the sort, and we don't have any money. Well, there was no R because it was a lie. But this was how it could never do anything. So that is the wrong answer. We don't have any money. But he will run into this. He will run into inferences like this. So he should always prove his point. And the way he proves his point, to show the coins he has. These are the coins which we have. And the coins are the potential volume of production per department for the final product of the department. Not necessarily the final valuable product of the org. But these are the coins which I am furnishing. And we should be getting so-and-so, and if we're not, then there's something wrong someplace else, not where I am. Somebody is neglecting to bring about a demand for consumption. The created want isn't there. If I can furnish 150 coins called auditing hours per week in the HGC, and I'm not being asked to furnish any more, then there is something wrong. Therefore, sales and delivery must be very out. Now, it isn't up to him to manage the thing, it's up to him to have things. It's up to the production officer to say what can be produced and to bring about a consumption of the product. So, by the way, that's why you will eventually have to have a PR man as a staff member of the, it's a PR advertising type liaison as part of the production officer. I'm just neglecting to mention, it's part of that person's duties to bring about actions which increase consumption. He'd create want, so on. So a production man couldn't actually operate too long without PR assistance, whether he was doing it himself, as I used to do, or whether it was being done for him. That's why he has a PR man. The rest of it is he's handling human emotion and reaction inside the organization, but remember, he has a public outside, and that public outside is actually of a senior importance to the public opinion inside, and he's got to test that, and he would know what tone scale to launch his campaigns and his ads at, and he could collect old successful campaigns that were successful and where the people came from that bought services some earlier time, and all of this sort of thing can be done. So therefore, it puts a production man in charge of consumption to know this. But nevertheless, it's the HAS's responsibility to furnish the coins which will meet that consumption. For instance, he can actually go down department after department and demonstrate how many hours of production, how many production coins, that is to say, how many auditing hours, how many instructor hours, how many this and that, how many student hours, instructor minutes, student hours, how many bulk mail mailings, how many letters out, how many this and so forth. He could cast up the immediate stats of the organization. Now, an organization that just runs accidentally on stats is not being run. That organization is running the person. It's running the HAS. And of course his area will be very confused. He should and could carry a shadow line on a graph, which would tell him immediately who to hat. He knows what the well-done auditing hours of the organization should be, because he has that many auditor hours to expend. So, the very well-done auditing hours and so forth, or well-done auditing hours, ought to be the number he is furnishing. It's very simple. He's put the coin there to be spent, and it's been spent. All right, so the well-done auditing hours are 25, and he has potentially got himself 150 well-done auditing hours. It shows up on the stat once, the stat of the organization, so he knows it's sour. So he knows he hasn't got an establishment, doesn't he? He's got a blub. So who does he hat? Where does he find? Of course, it's quite obvious what he'd find in that particular case. He'd find a registrar. And he would then find a tech sec. He would also look at how many were done and how many were well done. And he finds out that 80 were done, 150 could have been done, 80 were done, and 25 were very well done. And out of those figures, he knows who to hat, who to demote, who to promote, and what per type of personnel he's got to have at once. So he is in control of the establishment, isn't he? So, for every department, he could have a stat, and that stat would tell him exactly how many letters could be gotten out, how many of this could be done, how many that could be done, how many students could be handled. He could map the whole establishment stat ceiling, and that you could call a stat ceiling. That stat ceiling per department would give you exactly what the potential of the establishment was. If it was not running close to that potential, then it was running inefficiently, and there was something wrong with the production officer or the org officer. Now, let's say 9/10 of these stats run great and the other stat doesn't. Well, this would be a matter of a conference on that point, wouldn't it? So, by stat ceiling, you could measure your establishment. And if you haven't measured your establishment by stat ceiling, as an HAS, then you couldn't possibly have any idea of who was doing what with this car. Now, it's one thing to put a bus there, and it's another thing to get it driven. And surprise, surprise, he can still hire bus drivers. Now, the actual potential and capability of a production officer would be how many of those coins are spent. There's the stat ceiling. How close is the stat to the stat ceiling? And that is the effectiveness of the divisional production officer, the divisional secretary, or the production officer of the org. What's the stat ceiling? People could get right puzzled with me when I keep crashing into tech services and saying, hey, get this point on, and then not beef it up, or something like this. See, something wrong here, something's wrong, looking around. Well, that's because it hasn't approached the same number of hours as are available. You look down, you find out we have 5 fully qualified auditors on full-time training. 5 fully qualified auditors on full-time. We find that we will be needing a whole bunch of HDCs who are OT3. But I find all the HDCs being trained as Class 6s, and are not spending their time on advanced courses. You get the idea? So these are the criteria by which you operate. Now, if you've got a stat ceiling, and you've got your stats, no matter how big or how small the organization is, what have you got? You got the effectiveness of the HAS, the effectiveness of the product officer, the effectiveness of the org officer. The effectiveness of the HAS is in question only to the degree that he's hatted people. What's his hatting and training? What was his recruiting? That's how that brings his in question. The utilization of that time. That brings in the product officers. How many products are turning off of this line? There's things like completions. Completion gets into the airy-fairy land. Now, the product officer who can turn out more completions per unit of auditing time without going quickie, he's a good product officer. How many of these courses can we finish up? Right now, I could do a horrible thing as a product officer, particularly here. There's a lot of people who have come to the ship and so on who have an awful lot of incomplete cycles in terms of courses. All you'd have to do is survey how many courses they had, and then survey how close they were to the end of which. Which course were they closest to the end of? Which grade, or which this, or which that, or which other thing. In other words, you do a full survey. So you had all the courses, all the grades, everything else. Do this. Sit down as a production officer. Shoot a completion stat by simply making everybody finish up that one that was closest to the end on the courses. You know, all of these all finished up. You would have actually an instructor minute situation, which was minimal, and you would have this fantastic completion stat. Now, a very dirty trick would be to move off then and put another product officer on the job and say, you see. Then for years later say, well, when I was product officer, that was... Actually, he would have done well because those people should have completed those things. But you can always find some products lying around. The only point I'm making. Now, therefore, there's a difference between the product officer and the HAS. The HAS has got simply the facility there to produce the product. He's just got the facility to produce the product. By his hatting, he can control the quality of it to some slight degree, to a considerable degree, actually. But actually, it's the product officer who can play ducks and drakes with this lineup, and he can either make it look awful or he can make it look terrific. And it would be the product officer who, to a marked degree, monitored the size of the establishment. You got that? If he's going to have much of an establishment, he's going to have to do an awful lot of PR, advertising, survey-type actions. He's going to have to really know, boy. And he'd have to have that special programs unit over there just pocket on special project pilots. Let's see if we can't. Why don't you approach some old ladies? I understand that there is a hotel outside the city which has a lot of resident. Let's put an auditor in there. Sounds mad, see. It doesn't matter. Out of all of this, all of a sudden one pays off. The total cost of running all these special programs is peanuts. And the income of one of them is $500,000. Do you see? Well, that takes care of all the rest of it. The product officer doesn't keep shooting the whole organization into. And every time I release a piece of tech, organizations, unfortunately, try to shoot the whole of their production line into this new action. I could shoot them. I could just shoot them in cold blood. They keep doing it. Why do they do it? I don't know. I think it's a peculiarity which also shows itself in some FEBC student, applicant, sometime or another will move aboard the ship and he will say, this is a fascinating bulletin, even though it is several years old. He wouldn't say it if he knew what hilarity it produces. The rebuttal to the thing is the law of gravity has gone out because it was discovered in 1649. You get the point I'm making. Now, even with all this product system and so forth, we haven't antiquated the org board. What org board did we fall back to? we fall back to the best production org board we had, which was 67. You won't find there's very much violated along the line. We're putting the cream on top of this cake now. All right, I'm not trying to make fun of FEBCs. Don't look so contrite. But it is a nuttiness, and I'm just talking about it because it is a nuttiness. Yesterday's process we can't use anymore because we've got this process. I'm sitting here right now playing a mean trick just because of this. A mean, vicious, snarling trick. Actually, I'm not. The truth of the matter is we're handling such dynamite in this new rundown which we have that it actually couldn't go into orgs that would flub any. We had somebody over list the other day and knocked a case. Just a little tiny flub like that. Oof. Straighten it all out, yeah, but oof. No, I'm not necessarily, although it will look so, determined that they will use what they have at this time. The real reason is because it's got to be a very, very groovy org indeed before they can handle this. Otherwise, it just blow them right off the face of the earth. So if you look into this, with care, you'll find out that the product officer will make all of his cash out of yesterday's development. And there's where he gets his overages. Now, I told you the trick of making somebody finish up the course. He could really shoot the moon. He sends somebody out on his PR line, or the person who is serving PR in the org, so forth. Will you please go around and survey how many courses people who started the day of blah, blah. Now we're going to get all those cats back in. Now we're going to finish off their courses. Yeah, but you can't get any money for that. Oh, yes, you can. You got your nerve making anybody give it a course. I'd show you a product officer goof. There was no product officer there. But this is a goof to end all goofs. The 8 course got longer and longer and longer and longer, and finally I think a person has to be an 8. The more newly graduated 8s are all 90 years old. Well, do you know what's contained in that package? This is wasting the facilities of an organization now. So the HAS puts them there. Now they can be wasted by the product officer, or they can be made capital out of by the product officer. So I'm just showing the relationship between the two. The HAS, he's got the coins there to spend. How do they get spent? Let me show you this goof. There was an 8 course. It took us 3 weeks to teach the 8 course. We taught it with ferocity. We had a course. Why didn't people go on teaching the course? Oh, no. They added every bulletin that came out afterwards to the 8. Every bulletin. Every bulletin. Yeah, the 8 course check sheet got bigger and bigger and fatter and fatter. They're still selling the same amount of money. Now, what would a production officer's reaction to this be? Student hours? Instructor minutes? He was throwing them away. Throwing away student hours and instructor minutes. He was also throwing away cash. Now let's add to it this one. Everybody who comes from an SHSBC taught in this has to be retrained. So we retrain them before we teach the 8 course, and then the 8 course, of course, includes all the bulletins which have been issued in the lab from 68 till 70. Jesus Christ. Viability goes out the window at this point. Why? The price of the 8 course is now covering, in terms of instructor minutes, is now covering an SHSBC, an 8 course, and all the stuff since. And do you know what the course lineup really is? It should be an SHSBC retread for which that SH should be charged. Full price by the giving org. Auditor comes in, class 6, can't audit, that's it. Retread, we'll run a retread course, we'll teach you how to audit, that's it. The bill immediately for an SHSBC goes to that SH. Boy, why I tell you in very short order they will cease to give flubby SHSBC courses, right? All right, the 8 course is 3 weeks long. Guy comes in, goes home, he's an 8. Now, it is something to be an 8. If you don't believe it, try to work with a 6 on 8 technology who isn't an 8. Or try to work with a person of upper technology above 8 who doesn't know the 8 technology. La! Horrible. So, the guy really never even had a chance to become an 8. Because he was so interested in coming up. Actually, there's an auditor band which starts just before the exteriorization rundown and runs up to about the middle of 1970, which is a 9. And believe me, there's plenty there. There's plenty there. There's plenty to know about that stuff. And starting then, for sure, we have had to specially train stellar 8s and guys who are 9, had to specially train these guys to make them 10s. So it isn't anybody trying to merchandise something. You want to know why somebody can't give a class for an exteriorization rundown? Oh, wow. They just make a mess out of it. Exteriorization rundown should be done only by 9s. There's a bulletin out which brings this about, but I haven't seen the courses emerge yet. Every moment those courses are not publicized, every moment that those courses are not in at any AO, any moment, every second that they're not in is costing the real coins of the organization, which are student hours. Do you know that other organizations sending in somebody to an organization cannot afford to send that person months and months and months? Can't afford to send them for 3 weeks. The fee is not the totality of it. It's the loss of his services to the organization. That's the real thing that it's lost. And the fee for the course is not it, and even in terms of money. It's keeping the guy there during that long period of time that's expensive. So your viability goes out the roof. The second data production officer takes his finger off his number and says, we are not selling something at its proper price. The price in his terms being, what is the coin the organization is paying? Then all of a sudden what happens? Then the organizations, the little organizations, can't send anybody to the course to take an 8 course because he won't come home until he's 99. Do you see? So that's bad production thinking. All right, it's being changed right this minute, but I'm giving you various instances. You could make a fortune right now. A guy blows from a Dianetics course. I turned out a little project, didn't even think about it very long, but it would have been a winner. That organization which did it, I don't know if I have any reports on it. It's just to the effect of who blew, who didn't. No, this one is different. Anybody who's had any Dianetic auditing, should come in and take a Dianetics course. Now, that might or might not work because you would have failed cases and so forth, but you could fill this in with this kind of promotion. The promotion that could be thrown into the lineup very easily is very often people do not make good gains, or they all the gains possible on a Dianetics intensive unless they've had a Dianetics course, and then you quote several success stories to that effect. Now, that would be the production giving kind of thing. So, all right, you've all of a sudden got course minutes. Now, it's easier to furnish course minutes than it is auditor minutes. But once more, if an area does not have very many auditors, it's got to furnish course instructor minutes and student course hours, because it can furnish those up to a point where it gets some auditors in order to function. So, what do we look at here? That is the spending of these coins. But who puts the coins there? The HAS puts the coins there. And if he doesn't have enough coins there, and if he doesn't have any reserve pools by which he can get more coins to spend fast, he's always in a mess. Therefore, the post is almost unhandleable, almost untenable, because he's the guy who puts the coins there to spend. A good HAS will rub his hands together and say, I'm going to put 500 auditor hours per week as coins into the HGC, and we're going to fix up the lines, we're going to fix up the tech services and so forth, and we've got a CS tray, we've got this, that, and the other thing, and the plan form of the organization is so and so, and he tells the production officer, and this will all be ready, and my schedule on the thing is something on the order of about 60 days. I will be able to have this. Will you, at the end of that period of time, will you have those things consumed, please? Boom. Now there's another method of looking at an organization, isn't it? So the burden of the HAS is very, very heavy indeed, because he's got to furnish the coins which can be spent. And he's got to have reserve coins that he can spend. And the real coins of the organization are not the dollars. An organization that doesn't make dollars is going to be up the spout, around the bend. Now, as far as the lines of an organization is concerned, and an HCO, which is interbulated, and so on, there's this kind of thing. Do you think a PC would be interbulated if you started a process on it and you never finished it? Do you think PC would be interbulated? Now we get into the real field of third dynamic auditing. Administrative, the administrator handling the group. He has what is called administrator TRs that cut through the noise, the chatter, and the aberration, and get the action done that he has specified to be done. And it works on the basis of every time stable datum and a confusion, problems of work. And you should know that little check sheet backwards and forwards, because the hatted person can stand up to the confusion, and the unhatted person can't. So how do you back off the confusion out of the organization is you well and efficiently and accurately hat the people. So the HAS who wants to get an organization whose own HCO is and interbulated and so forth would have to have pretty good administrator TRs. They're being written at this particular moment, and all the FEBC is going to be run on, and they wish to God I'd never invented them, probably. I think you have to wear padded shoulders and knee pads to get through these TRs. It's the inability to confront a confusion that wrecks the administrator. So he squirrels. What would you think of a DFP when the auditor comes down and he says, you know, this PC is running very badly, what do I do? And the DFP says, well, do this so-and-so. And the auditor goes off and he comes back and he says, I did that. Now, we actually had to have a pattern action for that. The pattern action originally was, what did you do? And you find out the guy did something entirely different. What was out? It was TR0 in that auditor. By the introduction of TR0, that was the end of that. We didn't have that problem in in auditing anymore. All right, well, you're seeing the entrance layer of the same thing. Only it's on the third dynamic. What confusion can you confront? And into what confusion can you hat? And that is the test of an administrator and would be the test of an HAS par excellence. What confusion can he confront? Because if he can't confront it, he'll just blow off of it and squirrel. Oh, I see. You really can't have anybody on that post, and the line can't go that way because, it's higher than anyhow. God, I got out of there. His administrative TR0s for the birds. So he walks in on this post, and this post is on, and they say, and we can't handle this, we got the bag along because it's on, all the piles are going to see it. It's on the boxes, you see it, and we can't have any, there's no pile, you see. And he said, gee, oh well, it's a mess, I guess. And he walks off back to his desk. You would be surprised what a Commodore's messenger goes through. Flag always has about 2 or 3 stratas of Sea Org in progress simultaneously. And it has the new recruit strata, and it has the student strata, and it has the old-timer strata. Well, you get sensible actions and so forth, but with this admixture of personnel around, you get a certain amount of confusion, because there will be a recruit on a post where you expected a veteran every once in a while. Well, you can always tell this because you usually get an explanation. And the Commodore's messenger has become, actually, they look like little kids and they fine and so on. Actually, they can probably do better administrating TR0 than anybody in the game. I just sent one on a mission, by the way. I knew they'd have to do some confronting. So I sent somebody up there that could confront. See? Simple. Messenger walks up, and he says, "Would you please turn on the heat on 8A?" See? That's the message. But that's, of course, a carried intention, don't you see? And get, well, it's on, and they just run into somebody who's just taken over as an INR and they're a new recruit because the ones we got have already been set up to take care of some other ship or something of the sort. And you can't turn this valve because of the valve, it doesn't, in the jiggy valve and so on, and it says, yeah. Got it? Commodore's messenger says, turn on the heat on A deck. Sometimes, if they can't get it through at all, they come back and they say this. He's explaining. I say, who is it? Ah, so. So on. So just run it up another echelon because I know I've run into a recruit who's standing a watch point. You'd be surprised. These characters have got the whole ship taped. They know exactly the degree of hattedness of everybody on this ship. The hattedness is usually excellent, but they know where it isn't. Why? Because the administrative TRs. So you go through your organization, you find out there's confusion, all the chairs are lined up, there's nobody sitting in the chairs, but the people are outside and they shouldn't be inside sitting in the chairs, and there's somebody behind the desk, and he's got a whole pile of invoices, and he seems to be counting something. You say, what are you doing? Well, I got it designed, and there's an emergency action here, and we've got to get in the financial planning and the amount of that which is coming through, and so on. How about what's your post? Oh, I'm call reception, and I, and so on. I got this. Wait a minute. How about these? Well, look, I've got this all. It's very easy to understand because we don't get the standing back with the card. So, hey, how about all these people? What people? All these people is outside. They should be at least in here in the waiting room. So on. Well, I got to get those. Look, you're just looking at a bank expressed on the third dynamic. Some lines are out here. And it isn't up to you to invent a new solution. It is up to you to get done on that post what is supposed to get done on that post, just like it is up to an auditor to get that command done. And if you've got that down, that's all really you need to know about getting an organization in. The HAS would have to have this in par excellence. He would have to have this in gorgeously. He would have to be able to confront any God's quantity of confusion, and he'd have to know his organizational technology enough to know exactly what hat to put on, how fast, at which instant. He knows what's supposed to be happening in this particular zone and area, and he puts that hat on. When a person says, well, I can't wear this hat, I'll put the hat on. And the coming down and along, and 18 different sizes, and so on. What are you supposed to be doing on the post? What are you supposed to be here? What are you supposed to be here? So on. Oh, well, yeah. What do you mean I got something to do with these dispatches? Oh. You get the reverse. Total dedication to a dispatch line. All hell breaking loose outside the office with somebody comfortably handling his stale dates as slowly as possible. So the basic requisite of an HAS, and certainly even much more so of an executive director, production officer, and org officer, would be his TR0, his knowledge of what was supposed to be happening there at that time, his knowledge of confusion, the stable datum, and he knows if he gets the stable datum in, which is the hat, the confusion will go off. He doesn't stand around and argue about this, that, and the other thing. He just gets the hat on that belongs there at that time, gets the line connected up that should be there, yes, and then he goes back a half an hour later to make sure it's still there. Now, one of the things that happens to a Sea Org mission occasionally is that it goes into an org. The org does what it says while it's there. The Sea Org mission walks out, and the org does exactly what it pleases at once. In other words, the ethics presence was not extensional. That has happened more often than once. Now, that would mean, actually, that the place couldn't confront its own confusion. So that at degree, you have to teach an organization to confront its own confusion. You're about to see bull-baited administrative TRs. Such a TR is trying to get a piece of paper put from one table onto another table, with 3 people around the first piece of paper and 3 people around the second table, with the 3 people at the second table completely unwilling to receive any piece of paper, and the people at the first table completely unwilling to part with the piece of paper. Bull-baited putting somebody's hat on, meaning by that just a cardboard hat. All the reasons why he can't wear this hat. Why he doesn't want this hat. Nothing he can do with this hat. That's actually what it takes. But an HCO brings order, and that is the drill that brings order. Because what are you dealing with? You're dealing with hats, lines. You're dealing with space. You're dealing with certain products in terms of motions which produce production actions, dealing with organization actions, filing actions, and so forth. One has to know what those actions are. One doesn't have to have it down perfectly. One doesn't have to be super pluperfect. And when one doesn't know what a unit is supposed to be doing and the unit is getting along all right, one should have enough sense to back out quietly and close the door. But a unit that isn't running all right and the stats are down and so forth, one shouldn't go in, hear the explanation, and then back out and close the door. That is the one thing that is wrong to do. So, anyway, the HAS then has the job of putting an establishment there. Well, establishment is an orderly arrangement. It is an orderly arrangement. So therefore, everybody in HCO should be capable of bringing about an orderly arrangement. If HCO cannot bring about an orderly arrangement, it will bring disorder into the org. Now, all of this may not be expressed in old policy, but what do you know? It doesn't violate old policy, the old policies which were written yesterday. These very interesting policies that are several days old, that should be issued again. The truth of the matter is that unless you have a center or a focus point in an organization, which is a stable point, which is then bringing order to the remainder of the organization, you will only have an interbulated organization. You won't have your production coins to spend. So, one of your jobs is getting something to spend in terms of the real wealth of the organization. And the real wealth of the organization, of course, is basically knowledge, and then the time and actions of bringing about what that knowledge can do. And that is the real wealth of the organization. And when you keep your eye on the main chance that that is the wealth of that organization, what do you think will happen to an office in San Francisco, as we had many, many years ago, calling themselves the Psychology Consultants? They went broke. But it was a horrible disorder, because the information that they were exporting wasn't even being used where they were. They were very individuated out from things. So what do you basically have in an HIS? You have just what its motto says, bring order. But what is bringing order? Putting in stable data and stringing the lines in spite of the confusion. Many an HCO, if it is doing its job well, would feel like a lineman, a telephone lineman, in the middle of a battle. But a telephone lineman can string a line in the middle of the battle. The point is, does he string the line, or does he suddenly Q&A with the battle? So you would get your administrative Q&A, you walk into the thing, and the registrar is supposed to be registering somebody, but isn't actually, is engaged at this particular time in arguing with, of all people, arguing with the Mimeo Files clerk. And is arguing about who would have what lunch hour, or some other unlikely subject. All right, what is the action there? The Q&A is to settle who has the lunch hour and walk out. You're asking the PC, from where could you communicate to an elephant? Well, he walked down to a very funny very funny examiner report I saw here the other day, just an interjection. Somebody walked by and they'd been doing a long list, and all hell had broken loose in their case. It's fallen apart. When they hit the term elephant, they walked up and said to the examiner, "I'm an elephant release." They were doing fine. Now, supposing this auditor had come along and the person said, "I don't particularly care to run that item," and "Why don't you particularly care to run the item?" "Well, actually, I haven't received a letter from my mother lately." "Well, what about your mother?" You've seen this happen. All right, let's look at this administratively. Let's look at an HAS who does this sort of thing. We've got to get in the registration line here, and so I'm going down and get in the registration line. Very good. Now, what is the trouble with this registration line? He's already opened himself wide open. And somebody says to him, "We really don't have any carpets." And he says, "Well, what about these carpets?" And, well, it wouldn't get through financial planning because Bessie Ann wouldn't agree to them. And the HCO sec goes off to see Bessie Ann. Now, if you just multiply this about 500 times over during a day, an HAS sees that his life is utterly unlivable. HCO will eventually be ducks and drakes. The whole organization will be walking through HCO. It'll look like Grand Central Station. If I were an HAS, somebody came in to see me in the middle of a traffic period and so forth, and wanted to know when they were going to get an answer to their brother's petition to have free rehabs. I'm afraid I would not answer with a Q&A. The PR factor would have to be preserved, but in essence, my action would be, what is your post, what are you supposed to do, and what is the traffic on it right now? and that would be the answer to the brother's petition about his free rehabs. Then somebody would say HCO doesn't give service. Doesn't give me answers that I should be getting from the registrar or from the letter registrar. Do you follow? Now, HCO personnel would have to know routing, and so does every person in the organization has to know routing. And do you know has to know is routing best? The executive director of the organization has to know more about routing in the organization than any other person in the organization, because about 90% of an executive's function is routing. Not only routing, but establishing the route to be routed on. A tremendous quantity of stuff early on any post will come through, and all it requires is routing. Almost everything in your pending basket is misrouted and doesn't belong to you. And just on that basis, if this isn't mine, you can take a pending basket and route it. And not cruelly or crudely, you look it over and you find out that it's all misrouted. So you didn't know what the hell to do with it, because of course it wasn't yours. And all it tells you is that routing is out, and there must be some other people around who don't know routing, so your action would be to get everybody checked out on a basic staff hat. And Chinese school on the org board, and a few more elementary things of this character. So we do have the processes necessary to resolve the confusion. They do exist. Who runs these processes? The HAS. He's the auditor of the org. Only there's a thing called a sane establishment, and he mustn't go in the same direction that an auditor goes. An auditor reduces the bank to nothing. Let's not have an administrator reduce the org to nothing. He's not trying to run the org out. He's trying to put it there. Therefore, I'd say an HAS who can't do creative processing won't be very successful. And if his TR0 is bad, so that he Q's and A's in any way whatsoever, he won't be very successful. So these are the various requirements of it. But if he can mock things up, and if he can hold a position in space, and if he can fix things, and if he does know confusion of stable datum, if he's determined to bring order regardless of what, if he's determined to make the lines go on out and straighten out, if he's determined to put the organization there and bring order in it, if he can confront a confusion without Q&A, if he can hat somebody, why, he's quite a guy. He's quite a treasure, actually. HCO personnel are so rare because these abilities are rare, because he's basically an auditor to the organization. He audits out all the confusions in the organization, and that's how he brings order. Now, what are his duties? To put the establishment there. How much establishment? How much establishment can he afford to put there? How does he figure out this establishment? Well, he figures out the establishment in terms of production that will result in the greatest return to the organization, so he can put some more establishment there. And why does he put some more establishment there? So he can put some more establishment there. Why does he put more establishment there? So he can put some more establishment there, of course. And what happens while he's doing it? He's got all kinds of people that don't know what he's trying to do and doesn't know why he's trying to put the establishment there. So they say, I've got a letter from my mother, and she has just said bongle dong, and therefore I must goggle. And he says at that moment, that's very good, there is the mail clerk, see if he has any letters for you. There is the mail clerk. Yes, but my mother, good, there is the mail clerk, see if you have any letters there. Yes, but I'm in grief about this. See the chaplain. Messenger, take this person to see the chaplain and come back and tell me if the chaplain was on post. In HCO, they think they're messengers who carry the mail around. That's because nobody is using it as a central hub from which order is brought. You can't bring very much order over a very long period of time unless you've got some messengers. I can assure you that. So, this is where the thing goes. I suppose next I will be talking about the HCO Department 1 in sections, Department 2 in sections, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and eventually chase it all the way on off the other end of the org board. But that would be sort of greedy. I would be taking all of your goodies away from you. It is you I expect to chase it all the way down off the other end of the org board. All the confusion you have had in the past, with order following all the way along the line, viability rising, and the planet in our laps. Thank you very much. Good evening. This is 3rd February, 1971, AD 21. This briefing is convened here tonight and is arranged because this is the set of directions which will be given to and is being given to the departing product officers, org officers, FEBC graduates to take back to their orgs, and consists in essence of the mission orders of the executive director, product officer, org officer setup. Now, the Flag Bureau has been working very hard and very long and hard indeed to get together the basic projects necessary to make an org roll on up the line and to make it a great success. Now, you must realize that if you were returned to an org and well, she's been gone, of course, why most of the staff blown, and so on. And you've got these 1.5 staff members that were hired yesterday, see? And that's all you have left. And you open up this suitcase and you have about 27, 28 projects or something like this, or some large number of things. And you'll run out of people very rapidly to hand these people out to. Now, I don't say that they all blew during your absence. I hope they didn't. We won't make that postulate. But quite the contrary has been going on during your absence from the org. There are a lot of good people who have been working very hard to keep the show on the road while you sailed around southern seas and admired the palm trees. Listen to the native girls dancing and learning to beat drums, and so on. And they've been working hard. Well, that is. And so you come in, and you're going to change everything they've been doing, and you're going to change any line they have accidentally gotten together that runs right. And I will sit here, and I will look at a stat for your org that will be going at a reasonable bare survival level, or better, and it will, of course, go down. Now, there's been an org there for a very long time, in most cases, and it has had its ups, and it's had its downs, and it's had its attentions, which it sometimes regretted, and its neglects that it sometimes approved of, and it has not been nothing, nor are the staff members which you left behind totally occluded on everything that is going along, because you will find that some of these policy letters and so on have already been received. They have been put to some slight degree into action. You will find that there's a certain clientele involved. There is a certain backlog to be taken care of. And they have managed to work out that if you stand down at the corner of Wolf and Yock Street And every few minutes somebody will come by and they hand them something, and some of these people show up, and they will be able to get somebody to come into the org every now and then, and they have a certain route, and there are a certain number of people who have promised to come in, and there are a certain number of services, and there are a certain number of people on the course, and a certain number of blown people that they're trying to get back, and somebody's got an ARC break program of some kind or another, and so on. In other words, it isn't all bad. By a long way. Now, what if we just walked in and changed everything? Now, yes, we say this org, which should be making $25,000 a week, and that is true of any org you were going back to. I would be ashamed to run an org at a lower level than that now. Is only making $1,500 a week and thinking it is doing well. People are getting born and going aberrated faster than they're being processed right now. You've got a situation there where some people are at very hard work, have been able to keep a very low level of survival going, and it is up to you to take advantage of that situation and push that income up, and that would be your first order of business. Your first order of business is to find out what is going on and get it paid for and delivered. And that would be the first order of business of a product officer. And the next order of business of a product officer would be to look around and see how he can increase consumption. Now, the poor PES, who has suddenly been relegated to secretarial level or something like that, is in actual fact your PR, and you could do far worse than to just put him on as a PR type of action in addition to his other actions in the public divisions to figure out how consumption can be built up and turn over your distribution division to somebody who is competent to take it over and keep going the actions which they already have going there. Do you follow? Now, I wouldn't even recommend that or insist on it, but because your personnel varies. But you will sooner or later need somebody who exclusively sits around as a product officer and figures out exactly how you're going to increase consumption by the uses of the new technology of PR. And you will find out that that is a staff job. That is not a divisional job. And then you as product officer are going to go roaming around through the org and banging off staff members as you turn the corners rapidly, and you will have a certain amount of human reaction to handle. And that is a staff job. So, your PES can continue to do his public divisional work, which must go on, or I assure you CS6 will become very upset. And you can find somebody and groove them in as a PR. But in any event, that is going to be a point which has to be watched, because the increase of consumption is a necessary adjunct if you're going to increase the income and delivery of an org. There is nothing sillier than a canning factory which keeps throwing the cans out the back door, and they don't get used. And eventually they don't can anything anymore. Well, the breakdown of that particular point is consumption was not built up. So you're going to have to take care of that. Now, what you are up against is the fact that you're going into an area which is, to some degree, running, and it has its own tradition of how it makes things run better. And the product officer has to take what's lying around and start making it into products. And that's for sure. So his first order of business, of course, is to go in and say hi, and we got great plans, and everything is fine, and everything is doing that you've been doing around here is fine, and we're just going to do more of it. And the staff at that moment is going to groan, and they're going to say, well, we can't do any more than we're doing because we're totally overloaded now. And at that moment, you say, well, we will have an org officer to take care of that point so that your overload doesn't particularly worry you. And then you go ahead and do two things. You've got to get the income up, and you've got to get delivery going. And if you search around, you will find all sorts of half-finished thingamajugs to push out, and you will find all sorts of things you can sell, and so on. In other words, it is a going concern. So your first action is a survey on your return in your newfound knowledge, a survey of what they've got right there that can be delivered now. If I walked into an org at any given instant, I would look the place over. I would probably move all the executives out of the service space. And that's usually my first action in an org. I'm not kidding you. I move all the executives out of the service space. And that's my first day. And work with their creditor setup so that there won't be foreclosed on the second day. And by that time, I've looked over enough of the situation, and I get a big idea as to what we can offer right now, and we offer it very promptly on any open communication line that is. And you have a special project, number one, which you will be given, which is that's a special project that doesn't include with the FEBC pack. It's with your pack, but it's the big idea that you can do right now. And it's already under a bit of flight, this particular one, and we haven't got the full results on this yet, but apparently it's producing people, and they walk in and they actually do start moving through the org lines. So you've got a special to SIM project number one, which is a good idea. Now, maybe that isn't all the good idea that you will need. And maybe you have to get a local good idea. But don't get an idea that on Monday and then not execute it on Tuesday, the usual fate of good ideas. The staff is already overloaded, so somebody comes in with a good idea. And that's just what they don't need. What they need is execution. They've had several good ideas during the last year, and none of them got executed. And so that you will probably find that you have, in addition to getting your special project number one underway, which is a sort of an all-hands evolution, and we'll get things going, you will undoubtedly find that there are some other ideas in progress which you can push. So your first action is actually to look the thing over, adjust it up a bit for production without disturbing anybody, particularly, and then get some promotion out, get some delivery being done, look around the academy of the school or something like this, and how many of you cats can graduate today, and we're not speeding you up, you know, and so forth. How long have you been here? 2 years, so and go into the crowded waiting room, and where the pre-clears wait for their sessions, and go and see somebody and ask them when they are going to hire an auditor or something. And about that time, why, you will be away. In other words, you start to get delivery, you get promotion, you get delivery, you get income, and you get the show running. Because remember, you are trying to get final valuable products, namely money, student completions, and PC completions. and your area has probably got tons of PCs that could just be completed, but that won't necessarily bring you in a great deal of money. So anyway, you will see what you will see, and it is necessary to understand completely, utterly, and totally that a production officer is there to get the final valuable products. And getting those final valuable products is quite a trick. And now you're being asked to get these final valuable products without building for the next 2 years at vast cost a large establishment at all. You're not thinking in terms of that at all. You're not thinking in terms of any of this except how are we going to get these things going. Now, once you start this, I can assure you that your first few days will be very difficult. Because after you've talked to the staff and told them what it's all about and tried to get the show on the road and played them some tapes concerning this, which you will have, and what you're trying to do, the machine will start running. Even though it's a little machine, it will start running. And you have already started, if you know your business at all, if we've taught you your business vaguely, the salt mill will start running. And you know the story of the salt mill. I've already told it to you. It was in Holland that this horrible thing appeared. And it started turning out salt. And they put it under mattresses, and they put it in the attic, and they hit it with hammers, and it just kept on turning out salt. And it turned out more and more salt, and there were tremendous piles of salt all over the place. There was no PR came with it to get consumption, you see. And they finally, in disgust and horror, threw this thing into the sea, and of course that is why the sea is salty and why we have to buy water at such vast expense in these ports. So, you have started something going. And I can assure you that at that point, you will feel yourself very overstrained, very tired, and very knocked about. Now, the test is to live through that period and to keep running ahead of the storm from there on out. Because at first, guilelessly, you will sink back into it. You start the thing running, and then you say, well, we've got that, and now you have started something going. So now you're going to have to back that up, and the longer you are there without your org officer 5 feet ahead of you, trying to get products out, why, the more difficult you will find it. So that the natural solution to this is the first product of the product officer is an org officer. And the org officer will hastily start throwing some lines together and so forth and getting some old scratch paper and so on because they haven't had any invoices in this org for 2 years. And your product officer will keep insisting on some delivery, but there is no place for anybody to lay any money down. And the org officer has to fix a place for the money to be paid down. And then there's this matter of paper, and how do you get the promotion? Because the printer, you see, he hasn't been paid for a long time, so you have to find another printer in order to get, that's the org officer. And then the auditors, they haven't got a place to audit now because the executive offices are all using up all the auditing space, and the org officer will have to move all those out, and so on, and here you go, and the org officer, now, you see, your tongue is already hanging out, see, the product, your tongue is already hanging out. The org officer came on bright, fresh, able to confront the world, and so forth. 3 days later, why, his tongue will be hitting the floor, and he'll be tripping over that. So now you have to remind an org officer at this point that the first product of an org officer is an HAS. And the HAS will come on, oh, that's easy. At HCO, well, we've got an HCO. We had some comm baskets out there in the hall. We got an HCO. And About this time, why, the HAS will be discovered to be not quite sure what this thing called an establishment is, and is liable to give you a definition of an establishment, something on this order. He's liable to give the org officer a definition of an establishment as somebody with a hat. I will have to be reminded that establishments contain typewriters, carbon paper, ballpoint pens, comm baskets, floors, ceilings, and numerous other machines, appurtenances, and whirligigs, and typewriters, and front doors, and door locks that actually lock, and safes that you keep money in, and invoice machines, and other odds and ends. And he says, but that isn't the province of HCO. You say, listen to the 3 hours of tape again on the HAS. Each time he comes back, your safest thing is to just tell him to listen to the 3 hours of tape, and so on, and to check out on his basic staff hat, and to get his HCO checked out on a basic staff hat, and to hire an HCO, and to put an HCO there. And what do you know? He's got projects to put an HCO there. So where does your FEBC pack come in? Now you've got your mission orders. There are, for the product officer, there are actually mission orders for the org officer, and there are orders for the HAS, and these are part of your pack. You have 2 projects, one of them Special Project 1, which is DECEM, and Special Project 2, which is Tech. And that's how you deliver the business which you attract with the first one. All right. You've also got the business the org is already doing, which you mustn't neglect. Now, with the product officer's first action, he will find, just to give you a slight review, he will find that it is vital that he have an org officer. And that is in the natural course of events. He can't live without an org officer. And people are going to tell you that the org officer is actually the HCOES, and she sits back with the same duties, same job, and same hat as the HCOES, and you say, no, listen to the 10 hours of tape which we brought back, and omit to listen to tape 1, which is PR, because we want production. Now, at that point, it could be expected that you have enough income, that you are going forward sufficiently, that the HAS can now actually put an establishment there, and he would continue to do so almost totally independent of the product and org officers of the org. Now, the way he puts together the FEBC pack is he takes existing staff, which is already in that division, or is supernumerary someplace else, but not using the area that you're using for delivery at that particular point. You want to cure him of that fast. You carry a ruler around to slap people's fingers when they reach for personnel in a working installation. And one of the org officers' brightest tricks has probably never been mentioned, is he notices a displacement of line and that sly reach from the personnel which he has desperately gotten into lineup producing is to slap somebody's knuckles quick. Do you follow? Otherwise, your working installations will be dismantled faster than they can be put back together again. So the rule of thumb along all these lines is the org, and the org is a personnel pool to the degree that it is not engaged in direct production, and one never dismantles a working installation. That's something you have to teach people when they're engaged in putting ships together. Do not dismantle a working installation. Well, yes, I know, but we're never really going to use this hoist here. And wouldn't it be nice Is it a working installation? Yes, but it isn't used for anything just now. Well, yes, that's fine. Leave it alone. But let us define a working installation now in terms of an org, and it will make more sense to you. A working installation is any group which is delivering the adequate production of that product which they're supposed to deliver. And you leave those alone, and you don't monkey with them. And as soon as you see a working installation under those definitions being knocked down, you're going to find that you are making 3 steps forward, and unlike the communists who only go 2 steps backwards, you will be going 4 steps backwards. Did you know, by the way, that the communists these days exercise all the children in school to go 3 steps forward and 2 steps backward, and they go around marching this to teach them that that is how communism is going to win. You see, and they have them walk 3 steps forward and 2 steps backwards, and 3 steps forward and 2 steps backwards, and 3 steps forward, and demonstrate to them. And do you know they don't even have a certificate to run SCS? It's no wonder they're squirreled up. Anyway, I can imagine the guys doing this, busting the auditor's code all over the place. So the upshot of it is that you can actually go 3 steps forward and 4 steps backwards. The production officer's getting his production, and the next day the production isn't there. What happened? So the org officer looks it over, and then they look over, and they see that the HAS has just got through transferring Mary Lou. Well, lightning should strike twice if it happens twice. So that what you're putting there what you have to have there as a production officer, and what is being put there as an org officer, is being done independently of the HAS building an establishment. You say, but gee, that's impossible. I mean, you've got this thing coming in from one side, and then he would need the personnel which you're working with. No, that's just the whole point, and that's why you have to have income. He gets these personnel. Now, there's only 1 or 2 areas that I know of offhand who have such a superfluity of personnel with such a missingness of production as to make the whole org fair game. There, the product officer's job would just be simply to walk in and tell whoever was supposed to be doing something to do it. You know, an auditor, they've got 12 auditors or something like this, or 4 auditors and so forth, and their well-done auditing hours for the week are 6.5. And they actually will graph it as 6.5, just as though this amounts to something, you see. I mean, it's marvelous. You'll find all kinds of oddball situations with regard to this. And they will tell you why you can't get production, but that would be in only about 3 orgs that I know of. The rest of them don't get production, mostly because they haven't got any people to produce. So, as you get production going as a production officer, and as this is being backed up, well, what do you do with these FEBCs? Well, you certainly, with these FEBC projects, well, you certainly put them into the hands of people who are not at that explicit instant engaged in desperate production on something else. Do you follow? So your HAS is mainly involved in either appointing, acquiring, hiring, kidnapping, shanghaiing teams. And every one of these projects will undoubtedly have to have a total team acquired for it, trained in it, headed to do it. And he just keeps moving in the departments as trained teams. So he practically has nothing to do with you at all. He practically has nothing to do with an org officer. Now, the sequence in which he moves those teams in is very interesting. And you will find out that this is the sequence that you had better move these projects in. And these projects are moved in this sequence. Number 1 is HCO. Number 2 is Tech. Number 3 is DSEM. Number 4 is Treasury. Number 5, Distribution. Number 6, Qual. And number 7, Executive Division. You're going to have a picnic. You're going to have a picnic because your org's going out of phase. But that is about the only way you can do it. There'll be some cats producing before some other cats are producing. So the subproducts to the final valuable products will start stacking up. And now you will move into another phase somewhere along there where the production officer is trying to coordinate between what he's got going and what is going on. And you'll find out that they will phase in very nicely. And you will just get more and more of it. And you will get more and more production. Now, I will go over the exact sequence of events that will appear on the mission orders of a production officer. And the first one is get fully briefed on flag as to what exactly you will be doing when returning to your org. I'm doing some of that job of briefing right this moment. Now you bring with you to your org the Flag FEBC project package and a copy of the org board you will be using and adequate copies of LRH eds and programs as per the projects. You will have with you your FEBC tapes. You return to your org and you will assume the post of Executive Director, Product Officer. Now, you will immediately choose and appoint somebody as your org officer. The first product of a product officer is an org officer. He has another set of orders. Now, your next action would be to quickly hat him using the FEBC tapes, which you will have. Now, you cope like mad together with the org officer to build the income and delivery up. To do that, you have these two special projects, Special Project 1, DSEM, Special Project 2, Tech. You can use and get these in on a sort of an all-hands evolution. That's just to stimulate some business. But that doesn't mean to knock out everything that's going on in your org. Your object in building up the income with anything you can find lying around, old belts and so forth that you can feed into the machine somehow or another that will wind up at the other end of the line as a delivered product and will produce some income for the org. By having built this up, between yourself and the org officer, you can appoint an HAS. As soon as you've got it going, not necessarily when you have built it up to hundreds of thousands, because you won't. As soon as you've got things going and so on, why you appoint an HAS. And then, to this point, nothing's been done with the FEBC package except Special Project 1 and 2. That's the only thing you've used to the package. Now, this HAS will have to have his hat put on pretty heavily by the org officer, won't he? And he will have to get some kind of an idea of how to check people out on things and so forth, won't he? Because he now gets presented with the entire FEBC package. And in the sequence of department by department, he gets a hold of teams, trains them in, and gets them producing what they're supposed to be producing according to the package. You'll find out that that will coordinate with your org board. Now, you realize that you cannot hire people and keep people on or anything else if you haven't got some money. So that is why you must run like mad when you first get back to make sure that your org income goes up very nicely. You can try to get your GDSs up very nicely. You can do anything you want to do very nicely, as long as you get delivery and income. And if you've got delivery and you've got income, your org income will rise, and there will be enough money there for the HAS to hire and afford the luxury of being able to actually groove somebody in on the project, not whip it across underneath their nose, get a small boy who can't read, and say that is your project. So you would be building a solid org, because these projects will build a solid department. So, as soon as he's made some progress on these projects, he will start issuing the rest of the projects, as I have discussed, and as I've told you before, your sequence and so on will be noted down as to what projects or teams he's busy grooving in and training up. You understand, he'll probably still have some people there. But if you are very, very clever, you won't take any of the existing org, except just these 2 or 3 orgs that are very supernumerary. You won't take anybody that you're using on your project lines at all. You won't disturb the org that is sitting there and that you've gotten into action. All of these people on projects and in departments will be all brand new, won't they? Now, wouldn't you be clever? Wouldn't you be clever? I wish you guys would catch up. We got the GI up to 21,000 now, and you haven't got any of those projects working and so forth. If you could build a situation like that, why, you would be doing great. Once more, why, it's the sequence is HCO, Tech, Disem, Treasury, Distribution, Qual, and Executive Division. All right. Now, the HAS can get this done by hiring and appointing and having them. And so the HAS is busy building the establishment while the product and org officer continue to get the income up any way they can. Income and delivery. Now, you've got to achieve the products of students, PCs, and the valuable final product of money, whether you have those projects in or not, and you'll find those projects will just move right in and start doing the same thing, so it's actually a reinforced action. So until all of the projects are in the org, you are in a state of cope. And both the product officer and org officers in a state of cope. Now, if you see this, due to habit pattern and so forth, that the org officer is the HES, who occupies the HES's desk, and handles the traffic of the HCS, and passes dispatches over to the OES, who sits at his desk, and then handles that, and if those posts you feel have to be covered, and it's absolutely vital during your cope period that they be covered, because people keep coming in and saying, where's the HES, because it's an old line or something. Well, put somebody there. Just put somebody there. Say, well, you're done. There we are. And so on. Handle the dispatches. And keep a list of who's writing them all. But don't you get sucked into that line. No, sir. An org officer should actually carry a pedometer. Now, a pedometer is an instrument which is hung on a belt, and it is used to people in the field of engineering, walking, hiking, and the Army to find out how far one has walked. And it has a little weight in it, and every time that you make a step, well, this little thing goes click. See? So it measures the steps. Actually, to perfectly adjust a pedometer, you have to go out and measure off 100 feet and then find out how many paces you have in that 100 feet, and it has a little dial in the back of it, and you set that many inches. And you set your pace then is, let us say, 27 inches of the old Roman pace of 30 inches, or if you're out of that habit, maybe even 32 inches. And the truth of the matter is that both the OES, product officer, and HCOES, org officer, should have a stat based exactly on that pedometer. All joking aside, the job is done with mileage. The job is done with mileage. Now, I am in a somewhat favored position. I have actually 4 splendidly trained and very accurate messengers. And I should hang pedometers on those, and I would probably get a part of my mileage stat. But they really run up the mileage. They really run up the mileage. Now, what are they doing? They're looking into a situation, getting questions answered, trying to find the bug in the situation, giving me the answers to the situation, and we eventually will evolve this thing and get the thing straightened out one way or the other. Now, that is a substitute for the same thing. But there is no real substitute for it, and if you were running it hard as a product officer, you see, I've already done some time here as a product officer. Otherwise, I've done a tremendous amount of time as an org officer. And my org mileage as an org officer is very, very high, because one of the duties of the org officer is, for instance, this is an incidental duty, one that you sandwich in between every other duty, is to see every person in the org every day. From 2 points of view, is he busy in wearing his hat? And on a personal point of view, is he doing all right? Because you get an org running like this, I shudder at what might be going on in one of our orgs right now, because it is an escalating affluence trend, and I know those poor kids have got their tongues hanging out. They must be just running like salt mills themselves. And if somebody isn't taking care of them, and somebody isn't paying attention to what their life is like, why, the next thing you know, you'll break them down on such a system as this. And that is the only real liability of the system. The fact of the case is, a person moves up in terms of velocity. And they might not move their personal life up in terms of velocity, and they certainly don't move up their care in terms of velocity, and so it tends to drop out of phase a little bit. And during the first few days or weeks of something like this, why, you can expect 1 or 2 or 3 guys to drop out of the lineup with epizootics or something of the sort. And you wonder what's wrong. Well, don't be too mystified. It is simply that they are not getting the adequate personal care that they should get in proportion to the amount of attention which they are exerting. So this is an important point. Auditors are peculiarly like this. Auditors are like racehorses. There's hardly anybody ever stands around and rubs down an auditor. But they ought to. They ought to. They ought to stand around, rub them down, pat them on the shoulder, and feed them oats. Because the truth of the matter is, they only really fade out of your lineup because they have not been given themselves adequate care and attention from an organization point of view. And I remember the old London org. A phrase was given to me one time by the HCO Sec London, and I said, I came back, I was gone for a while, and I came back to the org, and I said, and how are the auditors getting along, and have they gotten the consultation rooms which were ordered, and so on? And says, no. And I said, well, what kind of shape are they in, or what kind of treatment do they get around here, if I remember the conversation rightly? He says, treatment? Well, they're treated like chaff. I noticed they didn't have many auditors on staff either. Actually, there was a period there when we very, very fancily fixed up a whole bunch of consultation rooms for auditors, and each one had his own private consultation room, and actually there was probably two sides to the desk or something of that sort. They were their auditing rooms, and I think that we doubled those auditing rooms so that there was two auditors to an auditing room. But they had their certificates on the wall and a nice soft carpet and a good-looking desk, and they had their own personal effects around and so forth. And things went very well, but this is just personal care. So that you've got your basic actions here as a product officer is you shouldn't have to think of this. There's a reverse for you. Your org officer should be so good that the org officer takes care of all that. I can tell you an actual instance where a whole division was totally mystified as to why I was making a fuss and why my messengers were in a blur, going back and forth and around and around and around, and why a PR was showing up. And it was a very interesting thing. The PR survey, which I had conducted in that particular area, was marvelous. There wasn't one single person in that immediate area who was aware of the fact that the key post of the area was empty that morning. No traffic could have flowed. So an action had to be taken, and it had to be taken now, because that post was about to be empty. I had received the information to this effect, and I had taken the actions necessary, and the actions had been looked upon as an arbitrary action. And the PR survey disclosed later that the misunderstood that lay all through the area is nobody spotted what the actual basic situation was. It was an actual human emotion situation because people got very upset about this. They went through this, that the lines kept going, but nobody had noticed. Now, a product officer should not have to think of that. This sort of thing should be taken care of. Now, a typical product officer action is you've just been told by the DOP that he can only have 8 PCs a week. Oh, is that so? Well, isn't that interesting? Immediately, let's count these lines up because I want you to get about 20. Right away, now, 20, 20, 20, and hereinafter, you must never take any orders of any kind whatsoever from tech as to the amount of traffic and volume that they can handle. It's in a policy. I think you've probably read it. Do you know that an arrangement will normally occur between tech and the registrar? And do you know that a registrar at the drop of the hat will also start to schedule people for tech? Well, this is very wonderful when you look this thing over, because what you've got there is not a determined effort to reduce the production, but you've all of a sudden had an arbitrary ceiling put on the amount of income and the amount of delivery which you can do. Whereas the actual function which should be performed is the DFP ought to be on that telephone, and that DFP ought to have an awful thick notebook of all the possible auditors within the 300-mile range around there who can be called in and brought in on the job. Part-time, full-time, any old time. That's a proper function of a DFP. Now, therefore, the product officer will be driving this thing on up, and one of the things which the org officer will have to do is to keep it cooled off. And that is one of the reasons why you will also have to have a PR sooner or later. You can get into the most remarkable puzzles as to why this, that, or the other thing won't function. And the basics of them are a lack of understanding of what the situation was and the unworn hat. And if you take those two things as the two things which get in your road as a product officer, you've got it made. So therefore, you should tell the staff when you arrive back what is going to happen. And you shouldn't leave them in any mystery concerning what is going to happen. they will agree with this, I'm very, very sure, without any difficulty at all. But your final action on the thing is, of course, the production and the income. And if you can raise that income and you can get that delivery going any old way that you possibly can manage it, if you can get that going, why then you will have enough wherewithal to build an establishment. I want to point out to you that cobblers who become vast shoe companies started working on an old tire or a slab of leather and bonged it in a couple of places, and they probably sat out in the open or in a shed in their backyard, and they didn't have any establishment. In this particular case, the egg always comes first. And you can eventually get yourself a chicken there. But it costs money in this case to put a chicken there, and you have to make the money to put the chicken there. Let me point that out to you. If you sit back and wait for this machine, now let's go at it the other end too. You go home and organize everything. Along about 6 months from now, you'll start to see some production. In the meantime, you will be getting telexes from Flag saying, and you'll be saying, but I'm trying. And that's because you're trying to get the chicken before the egg. We have now got 2 actual case histories of trying to get the chicken before the egg, and both of them are horrible flops. So we're not now talking out of no data. We already know that the mistake you can make is go back and organize everything. The right way to go back is say, get busy, we're going to deliver now the show is going to go on the road, and so forth, and you guys have been doing great, and we're going to extend everything you've been doing and back you up, and you will find it'll all work out in the long run, because that is the truth. All right, so much for the product officer. Now let's take up the org officer's actions here. And his mission orders consist of roughly the following. Listen to the FEBC tapes brought back by the executive director and star rate on them with him. It's a very, very lucky executive director who has an FEBC org officer. Get yourself hatted as org officer immediately. Cope like mad to get the organization needed by the executive director product officer in getting the 2 special projects done designed to drive in lots of business. Along with that will be preserve the organization and production which is already there. Together with the executive director product officer, build the income and delivery of the org up. Doesn't say a blasted thing about building up the establishment. I don't care how you build up the establishment. I don't care what house of cards you've got. One card over here on the edge and another one standing up crosswise to it and so forth. And you say, God, at any moment that's going to give way. Well, it hasn't yet. Be optimistic. Now, you've got income coming up and delivery occurring. And at that time, why, an HAS is appointed, and you give him the HCO FEBC projects, the org officer does. And as soon as the HAS has made some progress on these, handing the rest of the projects for the other divisions, and you give him the implementing sequence, which I've already given you, and ensure the HAS builds up the establishment of the org by hiring and appointing personnel and adding them using the FEBC package. Continue to back up the executive director product officer in any way you can to get the income up while making sure the HAS is busy building the establishment. So actually, there are some teams that can be driven with one hand, but the org officer is driving 2 teams. It's quite a stunt. And he can easily get these things crossed, where he just goes in Oh, it would be so much easier if I didn't have to instant hat every time I walk in those 2 or 3 new auditors to show them where to take their PCs. If we could just get HCO straightened out so it would take over the wrong answer. The org officer goes right on instant hatting and gets mini hatting when he can and clears up the misunderstoods in passing. That's one separate action. Now, on the other hand, with his left hand, he's got an HAS who today tried to transfer 3 auditors to become HCO members because they were experienced Class 8s. And on the other hand, is not insisting on any security amongst people he is hiring, and you look up and find out that the hair quantity of which is moving into the area of HCOs obscuring the desks. And other things of this character. So it's not necessarily a smooth thing to try to run an HAS who has his own troubles. But nevertheless, that is what the org officer is doing. He's driving a mad elephant with his right hand and a full 12-horse chariot team with his left. And the above utilizes what you've got and as an org officer and puts you into a financial betterment which permits the organizational steps. And this way there will be no trouble at all in implementing these FEBC projects. And those are the org officer's orders. Now the HAS will probably look at these, turn them over on the other side, look at them and read them on that side, and say, well, these guys have got it pretty easy. They were all trained, at least one of them was, and what is this thing here that says major target? Nevertheless, you've got to take it from there. Now, a wrong way to do this would be to spend a year and a half training the HAS so that he could put an HAS there. And another wrong way to do it would be to expect that he instantaneously had a total grip on the basic staff hat without ever having read it, knows nothing about hatting people, knows nothing about target policies or anything else. So therefore, there has to be a bit of a check sheet that this appointed HAS has to go through in order to accomplish what he is supposed to be doing. And that would be of a vast assistance to him, would save you a great deal of time. So your production and your org actions, of course, are instant and immediate, but you can afford a little bit of time, not very much, but you can afford a little bit of time to get your HAS hatted. And his orders are, listen to the FEBC tapes on Org Product Officer System brought back from Flag with the Executive Director. Get star rated on them by the Org Officer. Fully accept the HCO FEBC projects given to you by the Org Officer. Start implementing these per department with teams. And you're going to say, where do I get these teams? And the org officer says, now, there is certainly some data here on recruiting and hiring personnel. And the next action here is get very busy hiring and appointing personnel and having them to man up the establishment of the org using the FEBC projects. Now, at the same time, if you count on HCO to perform the functions of HCO, while it is trying madly to get an HCO there that can perform the functions of HCO, you're asking the HAS to do the org officer's job. And we've now made that mistake 2 or 3 times, and we needn't keep making the mistake. There is nothing whatsoever wrong with the org officer calling Los Angeles and saying the crew of the Boulevard will report. Do you follow? I mean, there's no place in these orders is the action of the org officer in getting some people to get the production out or anything else, or in getting them hatted. Nowhere does it say that these are done through HCO. They don't necessarily. An org officer doesn't have to go through near HCO from one day's end to the next, except to get the HAS on the ball. Now, eventually, it will start to work, but remember, you haven't got a machine yet. There's no machine to run yet, so the org officer will have to do those actions necessary to put enough establishment there, only he's not building an establishment. He's building a jerry-rig house of cards. He's wise if he tries to build it on the org board pattern, and he's very wise if he tries to get the lines in on policy. He's very wise if he does this, that, or the other thing with regard to the OEC and so forth. He's very wise. But he's not ordered to do so. He isn't. It is no part of his line, sitting comfortably at his desk, to pick up the intercom through the org and say, "Give me personnel." He would be all too often surprised to have no answer at the other end of the line. It would be up to him to eventually put a personnel there. But how would he do that? By putting an HAS there. Elementary. So the establishment will occur, but an establishment rises proportional to the wherewithal necessary to resolve the case. So nearly all org officers make the slight mistake of putting a dependency on HCO. Now, the mistake that can be made by the product officer is to not inform the org officer what he's up to. A product officer's got to keep a running action, and those he doesn't even have to brief the org officer if he just hands him the notebook every once in a while, if the notebook will communicate. But ordinarily, after he's gotten something straightened out, he writes up what he did, so there's some kind of a record of this thing. Otherwise, this gets very confusing. So, it also works in the case of an org officer who makes no record of anything he's doing, when it is totally in contradiction to what HCO is trying to do in the same sector. You're going to get a very interesting ridge. But that ridge is broken down to the degree that the org officer merely keeps HCO informed as to what actions have been taken, which might possibly impinge upon HCO's basic establishment action. And then the other mistake that can occur is HAS gets confused and thinks the org officer is the HCOES, who is the senior, who really is the ethics officer of the org, or is part of, and so on. So you want to get that mighty clear, because an HAS who confuses what the org officer is and thinks of the org officer as his senior, on whom he depends utterly for his orders. Oh, no. Now, the org officer isn't his senior. His org officer is his nightmare. I mean, there is seniority there. The org officer definitely is senior to the HAS, but is not in the relationship of senior that you would ordinarily expect. A senior would be responsible for the area and zone. The HAS is responsible for the establishment, not the org officer. The org officer is responsible for the production. The org officer is responsible for enough product, usually product 3, to get the production officer supported so he can get products out. And there's where he lives. And if he has an HAS that's going to come around every morning and say, "What are your orders, sire?" and doesn't just get on with it, why, he's going to be in trouble. You get how these things figure out. Now, they do disturb traditional relationships in an org. And they disturb those relationships so badly that a staff that is grooved in some other way is liable to be a bit confused. And as I told you earlier, if they feel better having an HES and having an OES and a PES and so forth, why, that's fine. Certainly, they've got to have a distribution sec and so on. If they feel better that way, it looks better that way, if they've got to have something like that. You can always put somebody on there. It doesn't matter. It's just 3 more names on an org board. you'll find yourself immediately into some kind of an interesting situation. You'll find yourself in an interesting situation. You're trying to go through an EC committee authority. You're trying to do things in an orderly fashion, and production is always done in a disorderly fashion. Order is the exception. And that is why you have a whole officer, the HAS, devoted to bringing order in terms of putting an org there which can run in an orderly fashion. So, that is as far as your orders go. Putting an HCO there is quite a job. It is a sufficiently hard job that there were 1 1/2 HCO personnel in England 1 year ago. 1 1/2 HCO personnel in the whole of England. Isn't that interesting? Must be very hard to put an HCO there. We had them counted. I often wanted to see that half HCO personnel. That was a year or so ago, and it was a period when the org started to sag a bit. So what does it take to put an org there? Money. It takes income. Loot. That's what it takes. And how do you make loot? You deliver, and you get people to come in and take advantage of the delivery which you're accomplishing. And you develop the consumption. And that is how it works. Now, you are immediately going to collide with the proportional pay system, which is being abolished. Now, as soon as we can get this backed up and straightened out, a new financial situation is being arranged for Scientology organizations as well as Sea Org orgs. It's more or less running this way in Sea Org orgs now. The exact form that it takes is probably still open to some adjudication. There are some people who have a say in this line. People run these finance networks, and they have their own ways of doing things. You can't be too dictatorial and mandatory about the whole thing for the excellent reason that they also have a working arrangement. So the exact actions are based on this formula, however, that the org has an allocation, which is a minimum allocation. It's bread crust survival. Covers the rent and the lights. And it might cover a little staff pay, pocket change. And they make all of their money on production bonuses. And it's the degree of production which is brought about by the org which determines their allocation. You're going in on an FBO system, and it runs simply like this. Financial planning is done on the basis of necessities, and along with that is the state of production for that existing period, and that is passed through to the Division 3 and so on, and it's ad council action. And Division 3 has a checklist of the necessities of an org, and they check this off, and they see that if it's within rights, and they do what financial adjustment or financial planning is done in the field of financial planning. This is then forwarded to a finance banking officer as a submission for allocation. The finance banking officer, you notice the title has been slightly shifted, then makes an allocation. All of the income of the org is picked up and banked by the finance banking officer, in probably two separate accounts. They are management accounts. That money, which is allocated, is then given over to the normal banking system which an org follows. The adjudication as to the rightness, wrongness, and otherwise of this is done quite fairly. An adjudicatory function, when all becomes too horrible and so on, is given to the guardian's office, so that if this situation goes completely out of gear or injustices are occurring or something like that, there is a local submission that can be made so that the guardian's office can adjust it. The guardian's office has an excellent record on cash bills. Now, the management debts of the org, or the management part of the org, or management costs in managing the org, normally come out of the management accounts, so that the org does not have to be too worried about that. In that fashion, a reserve is built up, and expansional actions can occur in the org without the income being consumed in day-to-day running operations, and that way you will get an establishment. Otherwise, I can't conceive of any way you will get one. So, if the production is there, the allocation, of course, is quite good. And if the production isn't there, it is bare survival. And in that way, why, we have already got successful actions in this. There's a lot of background in how this is done, but it has never been laid down as an exact formula on how it is done, and you could expect that formula from time to time to be shifted. But the formula is simply that. There is a basic allocation to the org, and that basic allocation keeps it from getting into the sheriff's hands, and that's about all. And the org, to make any income and pay and do other things of that character and pay its payrolls and so forth, that org would then have to have certain production, and these are called production bonuses. But they aren't bonuses to the individual, they're bonuses to the org. Now that would influence financial planning and might very well act in this fashion. The product of such and such a division was practically nil. Therefore, the requests for FP and so forth by that division and so forth would get a rather jaundiced eye from the Treasury side. That would certainly get a jaundiced eye from the finance office. 15 staff members producing nothing. So it doesn't get a bonus. So that division would stay on a starvation level until it got a production. And in that way, then you don't have your throat cut as a product officer of having all kinds of consumption of the valuable final product of the org in such a way that you cannot build an establishment, because you find yourself just stalled on a plane unless such a system were introduced. The proportional pay system has served its purpose. As long as I was managing orgs fairly directly, people actually received more money than they ordinarily would have received on the proportional pay system. That has not been the case for some time. And the proportional pay system was to maintain an org so that it did not become insolvent. And we have maintained these orgs, now we're ready to boom them, and so on. So the proportional pay system, people are thanked for having been on that system, as horrible as that system occasionally worked out to be, but they have actually served their purpose. They have kept the beachhead. Let me say one more thing about the finance system. The thing that you'll run into in the finance system is not understanding it. And the reason people won't understand it is too simple. Actually, you're running on a much more complicated finance system now. Now, of course, the valuable final products of the org are on the FEBC org board at the bottom, or should be, and I can read them all. Now, there are products, and there are valuable final products. All right, now let's look at this. Product. Each department would have a product. Each division, theoretically, has a product. And these products are, in the most part, sub-products, if you want to be very technical about it, because they build up into a valuable final product. Now, a valuable final product is one that you can exchange with the society for the wherewithal which the society has. This is by its definition. By definition, it is something for which you can exchange the services and goods of the society. And if you want that, now, of course, that would seem to be just money. And the truth of the matter is, to a large degree, the society, not really delivering and not really serving, has to count totally upon money. But a trained auditor is a valuable final product because he's an interchange with the society around you. A pre-clear is a valuable final product because he brings about an interchange with the society around you. And money is a valuable final product because it brings about an interchange with the society around you. In even a communism where money is outlawed, but they have income tax, you didn't know that about Russia. One of the Russians' main problems today is income tax. You didn't know that. Well, anyhow, they invented it. They ought to get it, boy, overt motivator sequences. But you, in actual fact, on this type of economy and thinking in this particular way, you would see that a pre-clear receiving service actually does bring about an interchange. An auditor out in the society receives an interchange. And if you look over economics as, we'll look it over from the standpoint of barter. You will understand far more about money than they understand in Switzerland. That's a dirty remark, isn't it? Oh, it's the only trouble with Switzerland is that's all they understand. That money is money. 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 Now they understand pretty well how to is this money to here and is the money back again and so on, and one day it'll all as is and they'll wonder what in the devil they're doing. The truth of the matter is that barter is a better expression of economics any day of the week. Why? Because when money inflates and goes bad, people resort to barter, so barter must be the basis of money. So therefore, that is something which you should keep in mind. If the world all of a sudden goes communist or socialist or fascist or something else, where your money factors go out, you still have a barter-type system which can function. A barter system is clumsy. And I'm not saying that barter is the thing you should engage in. I'm just showing you that there are different coins than cash. There are different coins in cash which interchange with the society. So therefore, some of the products which you have themselves could probably be dignified if you change the economy you're operating with as valuable final products. But the wherewithal which you need in the society in which you will operate is money. And the way to make money is to turn out valuable products in terms of money and receive the money and convert it into an establishment in your way. It's a relative simplicity of the system which lends itself to use. But there are other systems, and you can work them out and so on, because basically what you're trying to do is interchange. You're trying to get services for service. And if you understand barter and how service could be translated directly into commodity. And you understand that that can occur, you'll all of a sudden realize that your service has to be real. And that every product that you put out has to be an interchangeable product with commodity, potentially. And that doesn't mean a misaudited, flubbed-up Preakler. Now you go out and try to trade a banged-up can of beans for a nice, sleek, new can of soup, and you will see at once that your product has to stand up. And money obscures the fact that delivery must be of good quality. And that is the thing which you must remember in doing a product officer job, that your delivery has to remain of good quality. So therefore, you probably have a hill to climb in getting up quality. A stat actually should consist of volume, quality, and viability. And the quality must not be neglected. But you can try to push the quality up so high that you get no interchange at all. The art formula applies to production. In the case of the art formula, which is, you see, that it is a communication, you could actually push the perfection of art up to a point where it not only doesn't communicate, it's never released at all. I sometimes watch a CS grooming up a PC with life repairs, and I wonder if he's trying to repaint Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa. I get them across my desk every once in a while. The guy has certainly gone as high as he possibly could go in this grade, and if we repair him just once more, or if we groom him up just one extra auditing command, we have had it. So there's a time when you let go of the product. You see, so communication must still exist. There must be a transfer of communication particles called products. In other words, they've got to flow. So your quality is something that you rise. It's on your letter registrar can sometimes tell you, we are working here. Why didn't we get any letters out this week? Well, actually, we're checking out everybody in CF, and we're filing up CF perfectly. And we have got quality here, and we've got to raise this quality because we've had 2 letters in the past year which have criticized us for our lack of quality. So the 100,000 letters which we expect to get out in this year must be of good quality, and the 462 replies we get every week are neglected because they aren't complaining or something. I mean, it's as crazy as this. You just get crazy explanation. Now, the way to do it is you get your volume and then make it of quality. So you will have to do this, of course, with technical delivery. So this is true of all of these products. Every one of these products. Get it up in volume, improve its quality. And if you do that, you will achieve viability. If you try to improve its quality without raising its volume, you will not ever achieve viability, nor will you achieve volume. So it goes 1, 2, 3. It goes volume, quality, viability. And one of those things extends from the last one. So you think in those terms in production, you think in those terms with regard to all of the products which you have departmentally. And I'll just read you off rapidly so it'll be a matter of record the various products of departments as they exist as of this particular time, and reserve the right to improve this list or improve the wording of these products. And that is Department 21 is the technology of Dianetics and Scientology and its products. In other words, that is the knowledge with which you are dealing. But it's the technology of Dianetics and Scientology and its products. Well, that's great, you say, but really, the Office of WLRH and Ron is on flying and so forth. No, you've got a Department 21 in your org. Now, policy knowledge is going to leave the Guardian's office as a function and is being moved over into the office of LRH. And this was one of the old hats of the LRH com, and you'll find an old-time LRH com knows his policy backwards and forwards. So that's putting it out. Yes, he says, but really, he isn't keeping the Mimeo files. How could he do it? No. That's knowledge. Now, if your Department 21 isn't putting out any knowledge in this direction of any kind whatsoever, or offering anything and so forth, why, it's not doing its job. What was the LRH number 1 EDS? And why was the LRH com trying to put those into orgs? It was directly and with some asperity in cases trying to put knowledge into the lines, right? Now, Department 1 is effective personnel posted and hatted. Now, that is posted, of course, includes an org board, and effective personnel, you'd have to get some personnel, so of course it includes recruited personnel. So there's a subproduct of that is hired, recruited, or acquired personnel. But the end result of this, the actions of that department, are effective personnel posted and hatted. If you don't have any personnel, you know what department to look to. Now, the odd part of it is a very valuable commodity in the society is a staff member. And this is sufficiently valuable as a point of interchange, although you really can't get any money for it sometimes. I first hit this when I found out why I was losing secretaries way back in the early 50s. The fact that a girl had been my secretary was an adequate recommendation to become an executive secretary to some millionaire someplace, and I lost more secretaries. They were trained up. And it was very funny what my secretary in a South African country was just an average stenographer until I got her trained up for a very short period of time. And what do you know? She was hired by the richest man in Malawi for $10,000 a year. Why? Well, they knew administrative systems. They knew the basic fundamentals of administrative systems. And so they went into a category called executive secretary. Do you know that you lose people all over the place to businesses? Your orgs actually lose people to businesses. You look around and find out what they're doing now. Those staff members who have been well-trained turn up in the most remarkable places. I remember one time in London, somebody called up some big corporation to talk to its president one day, and they wanted to know what they wanted to talk to him about. And it said, I think the person calling said, well, I want to talk to him about Scientology. And there was a click and a whoop and so forth on the phone. And a voice came on the phone and said, this is Mr. Blank, Scientology consultant. And the person doing the phoning was talking to his junior of last week. Now, this is one of the reasons why we've instituted in the Department of Training a hat college. Because apparently a valuable commodity. Just look amongst yourselves how you fight to keep or connive to acquire an experienced, trained, or hatted staff member. Now tell me they're not valuable. All right. Department 2 is communications easily accepted and swiftly delivered. Doesn't need too much embroidery, but it's just that. Now, it, of course, could have volume, and it could have quality, and oddly enough, can have viability. Don't mail the mail for a couple of weeks and see how broke you go. Well, of course, that's pretty blunt. But the truth of the matter is, you will hear occasionally somebody who is trying to raise the quality of the letter registrar. I've had this happen. Raise the quality of the letter registrar's letters. True enough, they can be ghastly occasionally. But somebody is busy trying to raise this quality like mad. And you say, why? Well, this stuff just pours in from the org, you see, and people in the field don't like it or they don't accept it. And do you know that a survey proved entirely the reverse? That even when they didn't answer them, that the bulk of the people around and so forth were very happy and a little bit honored to get communications from the org. You see, you only hear from the people who complain. And the other guys sit out there and they receive them, and they're very happy to receive these things. Once in a blue moon where you'll get a complaint. A 6,000 circulation magazine editor once told me that people in the field didn't like the hard sell that was in the magazine. And I said, how many people in the field? And she scraped up every letter that could be scraped up, and there were 12. What a batting average. 12 out of 6,000? Unfortunately, that state of mind prevailed. The magazine went soft sell, and the org's income started going out the bottom. Well, this is not necessarily that, but this is just mailed communications, easily accepted, it says. So a communication, which is a dispatch in its proper form, is easily accepted. A dispatch, anything that is mailed that can be accepted. And the truth of the matter is that a quality factor enters in there, and a person can object along that line to the quality. And we used to have things called comm inspections. It could easily be extended over also into quality. So, Department 2 is communications, as I said, easily accepted and swiftly delivered. And Department 3 is an established, active, and ethical org. Well, that's the product. So that is the product of HCO, so it's the product of the last department of HCO. And look what that department contains. It contains inspection, it contains stats, and it contains ethics. And you couldn't have much of an establishment unless it were an ethical establishment. And it argues back and forth against itself, so that is the product. If you don't have a product, well, then somebody must not be using the expertise of stats and that sort of thing with regard to the stat. The staff stats and so forth, that maybe nobody even looks at them. Neglect any place along the line in that department will wind up with not having one. So that, you can say, is the product. Now, Department 4 is effective promotion pieces printed and sent out. So, notice it says effective. Wipes out a lot of Mimeo magazines. Puts in a lot of surveys. It actually changes your operating line because effective, what is the definition of effective? Well, you can sure figure that out. It would be something that was answered, and preferably answered with a body. So the org mailed out 1,000 promotion pieces, only 900 people came in. What the hell is the matter with that department? But that is the ratio on which you would be operating. How much went on, how much came in. You could probably figure the percent. Department 5 is half-course packs and tapes, plus these valuable final products of the org. Sold and delivered books, sold and delivered tapes, sold and delivered meters, sold and delivered insignia. You probably someday or another will see that product kneaded up, but if you just keep up, if it gets kneaded up and those disappear, you'll have had it. The funny part of it is that a sold and delivered book does not cease to be a valuable final product of the org, because it is out there, read and read again and read by somebody else and so on. So when you don't have books out there, you of course are not exporting knowledge to the society. And tapes, when tapes disappeared once out of a whole continental area, tiny one, the whole subject went bad. And it was a why. A why was eventually found in the terminology of that day, and it was found that they hadn't played a single tape anywhere in that area for 2 years. When they played no tapes from that area for 2 years, it went bad. And when tapes were played again, why, everything got fine. So it was just the fact of communication. There was a factor of communication which had been dropped. So if your org isn't selling any tapes, if you don't have any tapes being played down in the distribution division or someplace, or somebody isn't playing tapes, or there aren't any study groups playing tapes, and there's no tapes, why, you will develop some trouble. Not from us, you'll develop some trouble from your field. And of course, sold and delivered meters and over the dead body of numerous individuals who seem to make it their dedicated possibility of holding their withholds absolutely secret, and if I were them, I would, you know. We're still selling meters. Now, sold and delivered insignia is not done anywhere near enough. But look, I wonder why your org doesn't sell the student the materials of his course. You know, I think it's a shame that he doesn't. And I wonder why somebody can't have his hat when he goes away. I should think he could. And I wonder why an SHSBC doesn't have every SHSBC tape he ever listened to. I don't know why. In fact, I don't know why you haven't got a total archives in your org. See, I don't know why at all. So you start looking this over, you say, hat, course packs, and tapes. The truth of the matter is, we're just being big-hearted. And we've never looked at what you can do with hats and course check sheets and course tapes. We just never looked at that. We used to have a rush project, which was very interesting. After every Congress, the tapes of that Congress were instantly available to any attendee of the Congress. We used to sell an awful lot of tapes. Now, that to some degree is neglected as a valuable final product. So a product officer shopping around inside of all this can very often find some that aren't even listed down here. But before you distort the org too much, make sure they're valuable enough to be bothered with. Can they achieve a volume is one of your questions. You can sometimes spend more administering something than you can be recompensed for. Now, number 6, hold your hat. It's the income greater than outgo plus reserves. And that is why the invoice department is being shifted directly and immediately to 6. The invoice machine is going right over into 6. I found out, oddly enough, the reason why a management org must have a service org alongside of it was great interest to you. Anybody in a liaison office. Anybody in a liaison office would find itself extremely embarrassed if it were too distant from an actual working org, because they'll lose the scene. And the scene disappears from before their view, and the familiarity ceases to exist. And therefore, orders and corrections can be quite unreal. All right. So I found out that you can't get an invoice system into tech if it runs through cashier, strangely enough. The business of the cashier is to handle the cash. And where an org has credit, and an org inevitably has some kind of credit problems, as long as it has qual, it will have credit problems of one kind or another. So that any credit invoice or any debit invoice or any other kind of an invoice has got to go into Department 7, and it's got to be address plated, foldered, statement sheeted, and so on. People are always sending this in. We try to get out of the credit business. We can never make it. And people are always sending in $100 too much. And what do you do with it? Well, you put it into the statement files, and the guy now has a statement. He's plus 100. When it gets upsetting is in the book department, when they consistently will send in another $1 or $2. And you will go down in a book department, and you'll find that they very often have a little credit file. And people are always leaving money on credit in the book department, and you go down there and you'll find out there's a complicated little file that's being kept by somebody who's shipping books or something, and it's the most remarkable thing you ever saw in your life. It'll be 20 cents extra and $1.50 short and $2 extra and things like this. And if you don't keep it up, people get upset too. Well, what happened to that 75 cents that I sent you? All right. So income greater than outgo plus reserves is 6. Now that means that the registrar occasionally going to have to hump, but then the registrar will have various functions and things in the registration department which will function. Advanced registration is a total flop, in actual fact, comparison to what it could be by depending on Division 3 to do the collections, because Division 3 does not have the files or the knowledge of this, nor the advanced registration books with which to continue to send it out. So we all of a sudden have a address plating action occurring in Department 6. Anybody who's advanced registered and put $5 in on a course immediately gets a plate, and he gets a bill. And you just keep billing them, and so it has to go out as a billing. And the advanced registration only breaks down when this isn't done. All right. Department 7 is all funds collected for services and sales. That's all funds collected for services and sales. Go on. Department 7 doesn't have anything to do much with viability or anything else. They just got to collect all the money in sight, that's all. That's the way they do it. They set themselves up administratively to collect all the money in sight. If it's money, they collect it. If it's owed, they collect it. They collect it. So if they're not set up to collect, why, they've had it. In other words, you become unworkable. The org becomes unworkable from a viability point of view. One whole org at this particular moment, not one of the lesser orgs either, is falling on its head right this minute, because its invoice and collections setups are so poor that it is being paid $35, $75, $26 for Dianetic courses. And they wonder why they can't pay their staff. Well, the advanced registration, the deposit on the course, that line is out. So we'll just put it back the way it was originally and let it roll. Now, Department 8 is subject to great misinterpretation. And as pleased creditors, They're a product. Now, of course, you could please them by overpaying them. But that isn't expected. And as a matter of fact, they wouldn't be pleased if they were overpaid because it wrecks their bookkeeping system. But occasionally some printing firm will make a nice try and after that be very withholdy. They will send you 3 bills and then send you the summary bill of the 3 bills and then take payments for all 4 bills. And after that you find them very hard to live with, so they're unpleased because they've not got to withhold. But pleased creditors. Department 9 is adequate and well cared for material. The word adequate means it has to get issued, and well cared for, and so on. There's an additional function in there. They've got to be able to get together their balance sheets and so on, unless that is adjusted on the org board. But that is definitely provided for. The Division 3 should get something out that has to do with its basic quarterly summaries and so on. Now, Department 10 is adequately supplied courses, rapid, efficiently scheduled, routed, and handled students and PCs, and that is, of course, tech services. And we have learned recently that for some reason or other, this department will, with a completely straight face, try to get its quota by having 45% of its auditors idle and making 55% of its auditors work double their normal auditing hours. This product can really be goofy. So, when it comes to bonus systems and so on, that department actually loses bonuses for all idle non-quota auditors. It can lose its bonus and its pay, the way it's set up right now, because they will leave people unscheduled. They will leave people uncalled in, and there's where your well-done auditing hours goes to pieces. You will find that something peculiar is being done with scheduling. Now, one of the ways you say, well, the DFP draws up all these schedules for PCs, and that's all traditional, so what could that have to do with tech services? No, the way tech service does it is tech services gets the list, and then as the auditors come in, tech services stands aside while they argue about which PCs to take when. And that could make such a balled-up mess as you wouldn't believe it. One of our high-stat auditors, by the way, just takes the PCs just in rotation as they're handed to him. And the others shift the PCs and change their positions and change the appointments and adjust the schedule and so on. And in the process of doing so, they don't necessarily lose hours, but they lose their whole day. And then you ask them, why don't you ever study or something? There's a lot of abuses can come into this particular tech service department, and most of your trouble in trying to get up delivery and so on you will have with tech services. And tech services, they will invent lines to try to get tech services in. The basic lines of tech services are in policy already, and tech services actually work the most smoothly and so on along about 65, sometime like that. You find out in the org which you have right now, they've probably got some invented tech service line that knocks out your production. The worst case that I've ever seen was an org had 35 auditors, and some of them audited 2.5 hours a week. You mean full pay, full-time auditors, and some of them audited 2.5 hours a week. Why? How? Well, the why in this case was the registrar was doing all of the tech services functions and the DFP's functions. The registrar was scheduling the PC with this simple additive. When do you want your sessions? And then this would be sent over to tech services and the DFP as this person demands his sessions on. And all we changed was remove the question. And we told the PC to be there Monday. That was that. And 35 auditors instantly started to audit their full quota of the day, and the income went up right up through the roof, and my God, you never saw so much money in your life. They were going mad they were running out of invoices and everything else. There was terrible problems over in Department 7. I couldn't keep enough invoices in the place. Machines kept breaking down from overuse, and, cash drawers kept breaking, bottoms fell out of them. That's the kind of problems I can have. But the simple switch in this particular case was removing one question from the registrar's repertoire. Interesting, isn't it? This probably would bring up the question, when does the product officer cease and the org officer begin? They begin on the subject of line. Whenever a product officer finds himself in the field of lines, or adjusting a line, why, he has got hold of something that belongs to the org officer, and he should turn it over. He can handle it if he wants, but he won't get any place trying to do the org officer's job. All right. So, Department 11 is a valuable final product of the org, and a valuable final product it is. Effectively trained people who can skillfully apply what they have learned and will apply it. Do you notice it doesn't say certificates? An auditor who cannot audit is a liability. He's not a valuable final product, and we've got too many of them being taught right this minute. And boy, we have to put them over the jumps when we get them here. Boy, do we put them over the jumps. And what do you know? It takes two-way comm and actual case supervision and no evaluation from the bulletins. And just like it says in teaching a course. And the way to get a valuable final product there is get the course taught the way it's supposed to be taught. And that's all you have to do. It's difficult, isn't it? It actually isn't difficult at all. I don't know how anybody makes a lousy auditor. I think it's almost impossible to make a lousy auditor. So, anytime you turn loose an auditor who can't audit, why, you've cut down your field, and you've cut this down, and you've done that. So that's not only a valuable final product, that's a product that can recoil. Now, the same true of Department 12, HGC, a valuable final product of the org. But its product, now here this product, is the wins of pre-clears and pre-aughts. Its product is wins. It actually is trying to move itself up to the persistent FM. It is not trying to, as far as the public is concerned, and as far as basic tech is concerned, it is not trying to reform people. It isn't trying to do all the multitudinous other things that you think it could do. But as far as the HGC is concerned, it is simply wins, quantity of. Now, they're expressed, actually, by the width of an FN. So they're even on a meter. Somebody who ends the session with a 1/4 of an inch FN. Well done auditing session. It might have FN'd if the examiner had examined the PC on a meter. I'm sorry. Actually, my ribaldry sometimes is prodded into existence and so on. I've had too much to do with straightening out lines and so forth. And recently we've been straightening out some lines, and you're getting some real production. The production which you're getting is absolutely fantastical. And the amount of persistent FN and that sort of thing which is turning up on these lines is practically unheard of. Now, the exactness and the stress and duress which it takes to achieve this, and the exactness of the auditing and so forth, comes from the it's only doable if you have, of course, a trained auditor in the first place. Now, when we haven't got a trained auditor, and we have to retrain the auditor, and we have to retread him, and we have to recram him, and we have to do this with him, and we have to do that with him, and so forth, before we can put him on to auditing, then that shows there was something wrong with the instruction in the first place, and it just wasn't done according to the textbook, that was all. When it's winds, and once in a while I get something from the CS. Actually, this person has not done the 3 last processes of this particular grade, and the FN won't stop so that we can do them. Now, this is why this is couched in terms of wins. Now, how many wins can you get? You give quickie, lower grades, all in 20 minutes, and you've got 1 win. Whereas there are, in actual fact, about 30 or 40 wins that can be gotten in that area. So how do you milk this for wins? This will kill you. I had a case that was all mucked up the other day, and so on. Case came in here from someplace. God awful. Been audited upside down and backwards, so forth. And I took a look at this case, and I audited them on a disused power process. I'm going to win. It's a power process that patches up auditing that isn't generally used because nobody ever gets into that far or into that much trouble in power. So I just said, well, it's doing no good in that package. Let's pull it out of that package. Run it on this PC. We did. So how can you coax a win out of a situation? This case was hopeless. It would have been 179 hours of life repairs in self-auditing for the last 18 years. Gone all the way to OT6 without having read any of the materials, except to sort of glance at them, shudder, flinch, get away from them, quickly attest, nicely restimulated. How do you get a win out of that? How do you shake it down for wins? Well, you can give a case a win by straightening it out, and when it is straightened out, recognize that you have straightened it out, and the case has a win. Now, of course, you've got the whole parade all the way from Dianetics to OT6, all wide open to get wins on. That's the way the case is handled. How many wins can we get in this case? Not how quick can we finish the case, because that's a completion. You're off of completions. You can say completions on a stat, but the way the examiner is rigged up now, he'll register it as a win. You got it? So from a product officer's point of view, it's how many wins is that HGC getting per capita. And if he can just keep that flying, why, the enthusiasm will go out in all directions. Now, Department 13, it got shaken up when we put in a thing called a hat college, and it sort of tried to drop out of existence and a bunch of things like this. And various things happen along in this line, and when you don't understand what's happening, it's a good thing to just hold on to what you've got. That's a good maxim. And Department 13, Department of Personal Enhancement, is effective and well-trained org staff members. Well, that's fine, but they would have to program them, and so on. Now, to some degree, this is probably susceptible to a modification if the Hat College has this, but it isn't likely that the Hat College would have this. These people would have to be programmed and handled and qualled and so forth in order to make them that. And the STO functions have not been dropped out of the org. So that is just a fancy way of saying STO. All right, Department 14 is more efficiently produced org valuable final products. So you've got a built-in, an establishment correction machine. There's a built-in product 3, org series 10. And that doesn't relieve the product officer or the org officer of any of his responsibility, and it probably, however, will cut quite a few miles off their pedometers. Now, Department 15 is corrected org products, and it's earned certificates and awards. Now, actually, these don't necessarily verify or coordinate with the stats. We have a stat action, and this is where this comes up. We have a stat, a series of stats which scatter down through, somehow or another, give you the volume of production, the quality of production, and the viability of an org. And that OIC set of stats, when you're used to reading them, will give you all three of those answers. Whereas if you just took all of these products and they became the only stats you had in the org, you might or might not wind up with it. Now, success stories and the gross income divided by the number of staff members are the traditional earlier stats of Qual. And since we dropped those stats, why Qual has not been as well off as it has been in the past. So that, again, this is measuring something up by wins. You can expect some minor change in this area is the only thing I'm alerting you to. But when you have the minor change, why, you will have it. And right now, you have the fact that the product is the corrected org products. In other words, the product of the org corrected. And that would be 2 successes. And it's earned certificates and awards. They, of course, are very valuable to the people to whom they are issued, particularly if they are earned. And if they are very, very well earned, they are very valuable to people. And it's quite a valuable final product to the individual. Department 16 is effective PR and advertising actions that attract members of the public to become Scientologists. So now we've gone external. Now, if you want to understand the distribution division is external into the public. External. And the dissemination division, of course, is internal. But you've noticed that there's been a shift of emphasis here given by these products. We have effective PR and advertising actions that attract members of the public to become Scientologists. Bang. That's your outside advertising. When they dropped advertisements in books in England, there was trouble. They didn't have the flow they had before. It was simply an advertising campaign. You drop advertising campaigns of all sorts and descriptions, and of course your consumption drops, naturally. So this is actually where you're counting on your consumption of new zones, new consumptions. Now, you've already got old consumptions and things to consume oldly back in the second division, that's the SEM division. So your new consumptions and new frontiers all come from that area. Department 17, hold your hat. Department 17, this gives you an entirely different think from the standpoint of public divisions. Department 17 is hatted Scientologists. And some PESs will look at that, and some public division people will look at that, and they will say, certainly changes things. We expect the VGIs, well, they'll probably come in 2 or 3 days later. They suddenly get it figured out, and they're away. Department 18 is active field Scientologists. Now, of course, is furnishing these people with sold books, distributed materials to... Actually, if you look over these people very carefully, you will find out that a Scientologist in his personal contact does the majority of your selling for you. There was an old campaign, sell a book and make a friend. The bulk of your distribution of Scientology materials and so on could easily be done from that particular sector, providing these people are given assistance to do so. So you got actually the bookstore sales over there become very active and tremendously swelled up if you've got Department 18 functioning out there selling. And if there's groups out there of them and things of that character, and that's what it takes to make an org expand. You've got to open up new consumption areas. The people that will open these up are headed Scientologists, Department 17, who turn into active field Scientologists in 18, right? Now, Department 19 is a viable org. And of course, the valuable final products of the active field Scientologists are bought books, disseminated knowledge, environmental control, and a cleared planet. So that's how you do that. So they're hatted in 18. They become active field Scientologists. Now, nobody's talking about a field staff member. Active field Scientologist, they could also be one of those. And that active field Scientologist, if he has the valuable final products of bought books, disseminated knowledge, he will then get environmental control, and he will get a cleared planet. And that's how the job is going out. Now, the Department 20 is, of course, the Office of the Controller, which is really the Guardian's office with all Guardian's bureaus in it, and is usually manned in an org by an AG, and will often have an AG finance. This has the valuable final product of acceptances of Scientology. It's acceptances, and you'll find out that translates several ways from the middle. Translates in numerous directions. It would consist of combating an enemy propaganda action. It would consist of getting in good press. It would consist of quite a few things. But the end of all of that is a product, and it's an acceptance. So you could actually measure up numerically acceptances. And that, too, governs, to a marked degree, the viability of the org at large. So, of course, it adds into all of the other products. Now, if that office is basically external, and while it's busy trying to straighten out the goof-floof of having hired Sweet Betsy from Pike, who turned out to be and trying to handle that, if they're out there in the society faced outwards and handling things on a long run and an external reach, then you'll get acceptances. So actually it detracts from their product to handle internally orgs. And one of the things that's happening right now is the Guardian's office has had to take over several orgs and several sectors to make up for the slack of FEBC students out. And it is one of your duties to get the place running so the Guardian's office doesn't have to be walking up and down with a Sherlock Holmes cap through the corridors of the org. Get them extroverted. Don't give them trouble and don't get them distractions. give them reassurances. We'll take care of the org here. 19 was, of course, a viable org. Now, the org board you're working on here has the offices of the executive director, the product officer, and the org officer. And the executive director, who's really the product officer's PR, and the executive director or the product officer's messenger. The executive director has products 1, 2, 3, and 4, org series 10. He is basically, when you get it out into a triangular system, the planning officer. And he is the fellow that the product officer and the organizing officer meet with in order to plan up what they're going to do, and then the basic team action, which occurs after a planning action of this particular character, where you have the product officer, who is also the executive director. He is also the planning officer. He's double-hatted. You shouldn't lose sight of the fact that he is double-hatted. And the product officer, of course, has products 2 and 4, which is the collection of the product of the establishment and, of course, the product of the establishment. And the org officer has products 1 and 3. And that is the establishment and the correction of the establishment. Actually, product 1 is delegated, but is really just delegated to the HAS. But then so is everything else delegated from these. And you've got the full broad span of it. Now, a finance office will sooner or later come into establishment in Department 21, and it will have as its product reserves. But the facts of the case are that the org itself accumulates reserves out of its own allocated funds, and the cash bills ratio is reported, just in case the point ever comes up, is what the org has, not what might be into the management reserve accounts. There's been some confusion on that recently. So therefore, you have a list of those products, and it is germane to this particular talk I'm giving you what products you are going for. Now, the product officer, of course, has all of those products, and the org officer puts the organization there to attain the products, and as far as the establishment itself is concerned, that is put there by delegation by the HAS. The FEBC projects and so forth, if teams are put together to run those, you will find out that they very smoothly move into the org board as being the actual department and its functioning. What do you do when an FEBC project is completed? What do you do when an FEBC project is completed? Well, you start in at the major target and do it all again. And this time you do it bigger and better. And you can always do a project more perfectly and more voluminously than you did it last time. And from time to time, you will probably have amendations on these projects based on your own experience with these projects, and they will be released as an R after the ED number. And you'll notice each one of these FEBC projects is numbered, and so they can be referred to in telex, they can be referred to in correction, and they can be reported on in MOs. Now, the facts of the case are that when a person is on MOs, a person is supposed to report. Now, what is your relationship to a CLO? I can give you that very, very briefly. A CLO is there to collect data for flag and to get flag projects executed and to handle immediate emergencies which are necessary to be handled. The CLO is not there to send out work parties. It is not there to hold hands, and it's not necessarily there to shoot people. It is there to give a hand, to give advice, to relay data. And for that reason, in Department 21, you have another post, which is Liaison Officer. He's the Bureau Liaison Officer. Now, all of your communication to the Bureau should go through a Bureau Liaison Officer. And all the communication from a Bureau should go to the Bureau Liaison Officer. And any communication from an EC, any communication of any kind whatsoever from an EC has to be cleared through a Bureau and is part of a Bureau's functioning. And it is done in coordination with and under the supervision of a production aide or assistant production aide. The exception to this is the Guardian Office communication lines, which travel directly, of course, to the assistant guardian of an org and travel back. And those lines, although they will go through the communication lines of the Bureau, do not necessarily clear through any other terminal in the Bureau. They are there for relay. They would go there, they would go to external comm, actually, and external comm Bureau would forward them straight on, either to ECWW or otherwise, or an assistant guardian can actually communicate directly to Guardian WW or communicate directly to FLAG. And in addition to that, another set of communication lines exist in the vicinity of the finance office. And the finance office goes directly from FLAG to the finance office. There are three hats which exist then in the Department 21, and those are your basic through this terminal communication hats, except as I have just given you on the Guardian's office. And it's Department 21. You have the LRH comm. Now, basically, that is my communication line, and I hope after this is all set up to actually have a communication line into the org. Because now the LRH comm is so double-hatted and so otherwise out of department that it's sometimes difficult to get a communication into the org and get a communication back from the org. So there are three basic hats there. Just speaking organizationally, that's the LRH comm, who is the department head. And then there is the liaison, Bureau Liaison Officer, who is the basic communication terminal through which the Bureau communicates to the org. And then there is the Finance Banking Officer, who is part of the finance network. These three things, it would be such stress that I certainly wouldn't advise it, but it actually could be a triple-hatted post in a small org to begin with. And one of the first things that he would probably get rid of there would be the Finance Banking Officer hat in one awful hurry, because, of course, this is your final terminal for FP, forwarded there from the Division 3. And he'd have to handle all of that. But nevertheless, those posts, you will find, it would be very good to man them. And when you can get up big enough so that all three posts can be manned, this is the thing to do. So therefore, the mission communication goes out of the org actually through the Bureau Liaison Officer to the management aide of the Bureau to FLAG. And that is the communication line for mission orders. So if you're a product officer, an executive director, or an org officer, or an HAS who is on mission orders and has occasion to report on those mission orders, then the communication line is actually via the triple hat can exist, LRH comm, Bureau Liaison Officer, Finance Banking Officer. You'll find out that life will become much more bearable when he is just a Bureau Liaison Officer, and that is the proper hat for that order to be reported through. That order goes to the management aide, and you would have to direct it. It says management aide, and that's the nearest CLO. And then that will wind up here on FLAG because they report their data bureau, has a valuable final product of collecting data for flag. This does not pretend to lay out for you the valuable final products of bureaus, but the valuable final product of flags consists of things like workable projects that increase the volume, quality, and viability of an org. The final product of a bureau liaison office would be a project successfully completed, which increased the volume and the quality and the viability of the org. So actually a bureau, if you want to know what they're really supposed to do, a bureau sits there with the collected data sent to flag as their valuable product, as from flag's point of view and from their own point of view, or even though it goes through their own data bureau, and even though it is for and used by their people in order to know what is going on, which certainly has to be done. They're just solving this in L.A., and it's in a terrible scramble. It was, and now it's been more or less smoothed out. And that data coming through and sent to flag is a valuable product. Now, on the reverse way, it's completed projects. It's not actually written, developed, or anything else projects. It's completed projects. And those you would find normally that have the priority are flag projects completed. So a bureau CLO is not likely to be showering down on you with a bunch of internally originated projects which are in conflict with your FEBC projects. But the way an action bureau operates is something else you should know. An action bureau is the last port of a bureau. The management aide will write and say, how is project woof woof going? And he won't hear, and then he won't hear, and then he doesn't hear, and then he doesn't hear. Well, a report a day keeps a mission away. Because, of course, his action is to turn this unreported series of stuff straight over to the Action Bureau. The Action Bureau will be operating in a highly understandable fashion. It'll be operating basically under the thing of trying to find out what the bug is, find the why in the situation, find out if there is a situation, find out the why of the situation, and if they can remedy it on the ground or refer it and report it so that it can be remedied. They have an observation function, which is only fair to mention. So this is the way the lines are being smoothed out, and that is what you could count on from a bureau. A bureau is also there. They can give you advice. They can give you help in various ways. We are very, very helpful indeed. But we have been so helpful in bureaus that the basic personnel of liaison offices has just been stripped down to practically nothing, sending out work parties to hold people's hands or file up their CF or do things of that character, and it's actually a little bit out of character for a bureau to do this, so we are frowning on it. We won't necessarily stop this with a sudden grinding halt, but we will certainly slow it down, because an org is actually not made competent by being continuously babied or helped. And we are trying to make competent orgs that can stand on their own 2 feet. Now, that is the extent of the FEBC package. This is what we're trying to do with the package. This is the clear intention of what we intend with the package. And we're not, at this stage of the game, trying to do anything else but to steer you clear of various rocks and shoals that you might run into with maybe over-enthusiasm and so forth with regard to something, and trying to go in and getting in things too fast and doing the other action of getting them in too slow. You will set your own pace to the degree that you can make it go. Your own competence is what will demonstrate that. After that, it's up to you. Thank you.